adjust the agenda slightly here because of commitments various staff people have who are part of the presentations coming up. So we're going to move to agenda item 12, Freshwater Improvement Fund. Some of the background paper is in your agenda at 12, and the balance of the material is was part of that additional information added as item 23. So I think we're looking at some presentations on 4 or so of our hotspots, and the information is divided between those two documents, 12 and 23. So,
agenda items for this committee have no numbers on them. We just keep them told us when we get here.
that's right. You give me more flexibility.
Yeah.
Who's going to kick
So
us off?
there's going to be a progression of people. So the team are gathered up the front. They can. Do you want to grab some more chairs and just grab a seat? So the 4 leads of the applications have just run through a brief presentation. What the thinking is that you've got a reasonable amount of detail in the papers, possibly more than you really need, but useful that you've got it all there to help provide the context. There's obviously, these are the hot spots that have been identified through the annual plan process, so it's areas the council is going to be working in anyway, and we're awaiting ministerial announcements hopefully next week on the Freshwater Improvement Fund to see whether we can boost up the activity in these areas as well. But given that it's been a little bit amorphous and there hasn't been a lot of visibility of what we're thinking about doing or planning to do in these areas, we thought it'd be helpful that the team run through at a very high level what that looks like. And the other thing that we're working on that we didn't have available for this meeting, but we'll provide to you in due course, is what we're calling a strategy on a page, which is effectively a diagrammatic representation of the activities, which is the bit of material that we'll use to more broadly socialise the work, either directly with the people involved or as a bit of communication material for council and talking about its activities more broadly. So as we develop those, we'll bring those back to you as well.
Is Whātua supposed to be on there?
Well, that's part of the Tukituki package. Yeah. So look, I'll hand that over to who's starting? Anna's starting?
Ian, before you hand it over, do we have any greater sense at this point as to when we might hear about any of these?
Yeah, so the indications are we'll hear from the Minister. I was at a Land and Water Forum meeting a week or two ago, can't remember exactly when. The Minister's very keen to announce probably the Freshwater Improvement Fund information alongside the Clean Water Package, more or the detail around the proposed government reform. Indications are that's possibly next week, but don't bet the house on it. But yeah, we'll keep you. Yes, certainly before. Strategically located at some point in the calendar, I'm sure.
Do you have any sense of our prospects of success, just in terms of how many applications have been received information-wise?
It is going to be challenging. We won't get all of them. I'd be pretty confident in saying that. I think we're going to be in a good space to get a few. But there's a lot of competition for the resource.
How many applications were put in?
I was told there's about $100 million in total, and I think there was about $180 million of bids put into the first round. That's $100 million over 10 years. 24 million in this round. So the prospects are kind of marginal or slim, but if we're not successful on round 1, we'll be going back again and again until we are successful.
So 24 million available out of $180 million.
Sorry, 24 out of 100. So it was oversubscribed quite substantially in the first round. So 180 million for about 24 million in the first round.
That's the figure I found.
Yes, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
And it's a one-off. So the $24 million gets allocated, but it's not going to be $1 million for over 4 years.
It'll be spread over the life of the project, so it'll be allocated based on the life of the project, but there will be a number of funding rounds, so starting with round 1, 24 million, round 2, which might be a year later or a couple of years later, might be another 24 and then another 24. Not sure exactly how they're proposing to drip feed it out. And of course, there's also, like at law, for example, there was commentary around the fact that $100 million is not really enough, clearly, if we've oversubscribed to that level, and could we get more? So there's a possibility that there may be more come.
Okay.
So you've got snappy presentations and then into questions, or take questions as you go, please yourself.
Thank you. Afternoon, I'm Anna Smith, marine scientist here.
Click on that front. Just click the front microphone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I thought my voice was. And granted, they're called the Freshwater Improvement Fund applications, but they did include estuarine values, estuarine areas. So we took the opportunity to look at the Ahuriri as part of one. Now, the Freshwater Improvement Fund application was a joint application between ourselves and Mana Ahuriri, with financial and time support from Hohepa, as well as the Department of Conservation and Napier City Council. So it was a very well-rounded application in terms of those people who needed to be involved. One of the things that Mr. Maxwell just mentioned was that even through this process, it solidified our thinking and our strategic direction in terms of these. It's also solidified those relationships that we've been building in order to get these proposals out. So they've been a very valuable exercise in themselves. So Taranui Orotu, or Ahuriri Estuary, it is the most significant wetland along the entire length of the east coast between Ohiti Point and Wellington. And that's from a Ramsar significant criteria assessment done in 1997-6. But we do have problems. We've got too much sediment going into the estuary, too many nutrients, 70% of Napier City's stormwater, and we've got a massive problem with the invasive fanworm Ficcopomatus enigmaticus. So we've particularly at the top end of the estuary, there's been a decline in the state. You will have seen the presentation from myself earlier, late last year with regard to that. So we're looking at it sort of from the ocean side, but the pressures stem from the catchment, so let's turn it around. Sorry, I'm standing in front of my own presentation. So this is the top end of the estuary here. This is up by Onehunga Road area where the tunnel comes through. That's where a lot of the Bayview stormwater from that little area there comes in. And up the top end of the estuary here, this is the dock bittern habitat. We've got anoxic sediments with no oxygen left in them to support things that get their oxygen from the sediments rather than putting a fan up to get it out. We've got stormwater inputs both at this area here as well as 2 other discharges up here. We're seeing algal blooms. The Cawthron Institute analysed a sample for us, and it was the most biomass they'd seen in a sample. We've got erosion coming in. You know, one of these aspects is from forestry, others are from pasture, and we've got this marine fanworm coming in, and we've got too much nitrogen and too much phosphorus coming in off the catchment. So what are we planning on doing? The biggest thing we need to do is look at our integrated catchment management plan. The key thing is we've got a lot of people responsible for a lot of different things, so we need to get all the agencies together working on an integrated approach. We've got working with Hohepa, looking at the wetland restoration, staged removal of that invasive worm. Now it'd be great to be able to go in and get that out, but they're a filter feeder, so they actually help us when it comes to those big algal blooms. They do take some of that product out. So we've got to do that in partnership with our catchment management as well. We need to work with Napier City Council in terms of getting those discharges out and treating them through treatment wetlands prior to them going into the estuary. We need to, as I said, it's coming off the catchment, we need to look at critical source mapping for sediments and phosphorus, and we need to target our mitigation to suit.
Are there how many farms are in that catchment? Is it just, when you say 10 farms are on it?
So what we did is we modelled using SEDNet the overall sediment erosion coming off this entire catchment. Now there's 81% more sediment today under our current land use than there would be if it was under land cover, forest, native planting, etc. So what we can do with SEDNet is we can go back and we can say, what if we do this? What does that mean to that sediment loss? And we said, right, What if we fence and plant 100% of the waterways? There's 153k of them, so we're not going to be able to do that in its entirety. And what if we put in 10 sediment mitigation through 10, critical, focused or targeted sediment plans? And it said you could reduce your sediment input by about 63%. So it's really getting us where we need to go. Now, recognising we can't plant and fence 153 kilometres of waterways, some you just won't be able to logistically do, and it is a lot of money. So we need to target those approaches. So if we could get 63% sediment reduction, we could absolutely, the tank group have sort of indicated that they want at least a 30% reduction within the lifetime of the tank plan change. So overall, the application was for 5.7 million, so we were able to leverage 2.85 out of other organisations as well. The majority of that costing does come from working with Napier City Council, so that will depend on their LTP process, etc., as to whether that goes through. It has been indicated as part of their Ahuriri master plan, however.
Just ask a question. We've got
Absolutely.
that on that last slide up.
Oh.
Yeah, that one. Can you just quickly say the consenting arrangements for discharges along there? What's in play? For example, the Onehunga Road one, etc.
Okay. So at the moment there are 5 discharges into the Ahuriri estuary for stormwater. 3 of those are currently consented. 2 are awaiting consent or are in that process in some way. Down the bottom end, Thames Tyne Street, which is a Pandora industrial estate, they were issued a consent about 2 years ago, and we're working with Napier City Council as part of their stormwater working group and the industry around there to try and resolve some of the issues there. The airport discharge, which operates the air side strip, so not the car park, that goes in further down, but the air side of the runway, that goes in at the same, or probably metres apart from the Landcorp discharge. The airport is currently consented, Landcorp is not consented, they are in the process. Opposite that, which is again down that long stretch there, is Lagoon Farm, which is a Napier City Council stormwater pump. Again, they are currently in the process, and Onehunga Road is a Napier City Council operated pump, and again, they are currently in the process.
But can I just ask a follow-up question? So you've got a number of discharges that are not currently consented. I assume that since you're working on treatment wetlands, that will be a condition of those consents?
Well, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, but what I would suggest is the consenting process goes ahead as per. They would need to issue those consents on their current process. However, the term of that consent, if they do go forward with their proposals to put wetlands in, it will just be a shorter term to enable us to actually get that project management underway.
Chairman,
Councillor Dick.
a couple of questions. The stormwater discharge into the bottom end, the seaward end of the estuary, that comes from both Napier City and Regional Council drains, doesn't it?
Yes, so there is, sorry, the one I did forget was the West Shore Tide Gates, which are the 2 areas, the Puramu pump station, as you're going north on the expressway, just before you hit the bridge over the estuary, you'll see 2 tide gates operating there. They aren't pump stations, the Puramu pump station is sort of behind you at that point. They are consented. The consent is up for renewal next year, I believe. And the joint Napier City Council and Hawke's Bay Regional Council, the reason that our asset management group are on there is that's part of the flood protection scheme.
Exactly, so it's not just Napier City, it's Hawke's Bay Regional Council as well.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Now, the second one was a submission to the annual plan, was from a resident out there, and he talked about a drainage channel through the estuary that used to be excavated from time to time, and he believed that if the drainage function was restored or assisted in that way, that it would solve a number of problems. What's your view on that?
Okay, so yes, they used to drain it up to, I think it was about 1997, they stopped dredging, and you'll see that this is a fairly pronounced channel here, and they did used to dredge it all the way through here.
Yeah.
Now, the reason you've got to dredge these things is because there's too much sediment going in from the catchment.
Yeah.
So if you manage your catchment, your need to dredge it reduces as well. I would support dredging to increase the hydrological flow through there, because at the moment I think what's happening is you're getting a deposition, because this is so narrow, you're getting flash floods sort of things come through there. As it opens out, you're getting the deposition come down, and it's almost stepping. So a lot of that area is now out of the intertidal zone, and it's drying. You can see the salt drying on top of it, and it's just causing a massive problem there as well. The pump station there has been there for a long time, so the effects that we're seeing today are a combination of a history within the area. So I do support it for a short period while we fix some of the issues around the catchment as well.
I think the reality is that since Doc took over administration of this, and it's been that way for quite a long time now, that sort of thing has just been forgotten about.
Yeah, and there's also, like, you can see all this is the bittern habitat, and they did a really good job in there because that used to be farm pasture area. And there's a lot of area around here that is actually under current DOC lease for grazing. And we've been talking to them. Unfortunately, the leases are long term and they're impenetrable, I've been told. But there's a lot of area here that is trying to revert back to estuary. And realistically, coming into sea level rise, climate change, you need to be able to provide area for these area habitat creep. Otherwise, what you're going to end up with is subtidal stop bank, and you have no intertidal habitat. And the functions and processes that go on there, very important.
We need to.
Yeah, just a couple of one other or two other comments that are relevant to all the presentations. So this is kind of our utopia. This is what we do if we get everything. Recognising that if that doesn't happen, there'll still be activities in this area through your hotspot funding that you approve for the long-term plan. It's just we'll look to scale that to fit. The other point I'd make is that the integrated catchment plan would deal with things like, consider questions like, is dredging an option? Are there other alternatives that are beyond the scope of this immediate work that you might want to build into a longer term plan or strategy for dealing with tidying these things up? And that's the intent of having those processes, or they will be very inclusive. They'll include a wide range of our stakeholders and partners and tangata whenua in this, so that we can bring all of those thoughts together and make a coherent and clear strategic plan to deal with these things, albeit perhaps over a longer time frame than these immediate projects will run.
Tēnā koutou, good afternoon. Stephen Cave, if any of you don't know me, team leader of open spaces, and also dabble in a bit of engineering. The fifth project I'm presenting to, what I've been working on, is Te Waiu or Tutita, the milk of Tutita. That name is derived from Ko Te Waiu or Tātou Tipuna, the milk of our ancestors. And that refers to the lakes, both Tutita and Waikapiro's life-supporting values and spiritual sustenance they traditionally provided. This application has been drafted jointly with the Mangahururu Tangatu Trust. The purpose, to restore the mauri of Lakes Tutita and Wakapiro, mauri being the life force, making a place that families can happily return to and where children can swim. This project builds on work being done via the Te Mana o Te Wai funded Tutita Mainairi project, an initiative that is being led by the Mangahururu Tangatu Trust currently and supported by the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. The problem that we're addressing with the lakes, Tutita and Catchment, is simply that too much nutrient is in the lakes, phosphorus, and catchment waterways, and sediment still finds its way into these roto or lakes, eroding from the surrounding landscape. For these lakes, this means deteriorating, often not swimmable water, frequent, sometimes toxic algae blooms, frustrated kaitiaki, hapu and community, disappointed tourists, and unhealthy kai. Through the fifth application and historical works, a series of actions have been identified to address these problems and achieve 4 specific fifth project objectives. These are empowerment and alignment of iwi hapu, Māori landowners, farmers, community and local authorities toward improving the mauri of lakes Tutira and Wakapiro by 2019. Establish longitudinal flow and fish passage in Lake Tutira by 2021. That Lake Tutira is considered swimmable by 2020. And that the Mangahuriri Tangatu Trust continues to increase leadership and knowledge capability to address environmental issues within their takiwa, which is their large catchment area. Aotearoa. The actions and objectives, which I'll talk about, or the actions I'll talk about shortly, have been developed through reviewing historical research, scientific investigation, including targeted lake modelling, and long-term community consultation via the Tutira Mangahuriri Forum, established in 2010. So, the actions. We've been sought funding for, first of all, staff resourcing, so appointing a project manager, which we're a little bit light on presently, staff resourcing. A land services or land management position to work with the farmers. An integrated catchment management plan, so that's Lake Tutira, Lake Wakapiro, and the catchment up at the head of the lake. And that plan is aimed at reducing issues on the land, mapping out the catchment characteristics, especially those that are exacerbating the water quality issues in Lake Tutira. And these will then inform farm environmental plans, farm environmental management plans, which are mapping out catchment issues at a farm scale and providing a useful set of recommendations for farmers to work with to improve their farming systems for the benefit of the water quality within the lakes. Along with the land services position and the farm environmental management plans is a subsidy scheme, currently to the value of $500,000 provision. Aeration in Lakes Wakapiro initially, and then Lakes Tutira in about year 3 of the project, and that's what will help us achieve our swimmable targets short term. Reconnecting Papakuri Stream, or at low flows initially, to Lakes Tutira, which, while might not contribute to improving water quality initially, has been identified by community and hapu as a way that they can feel that things are tracking in the right direction and improving their spiritual connection and well-being regarding Lake Tutira and Wakapiro. Strengthening the diversion at the head of the lake. Currently, Papakuri Stream, I think most of you will be aware, was diverted away from the lake in the early 1980s. While we can reconnect at low flows, at high flows, when the sediment loads are high, we still want it diverted away, and to effectively do that, we need to strengthen the existing facility. Establish sediment traps, both on the regional council land, especially within the forestry area that's to be harvested, but also in areas within the broader catchment that will be identified through the integrated catchment management plan. Ongoing monitoring and cultural health indexing to the value of $370,000 over the 5-year period is also programmed within the scope of this project. Also included is in the broader plan is the existing Te Manawatawai funded Tutira Maina Iwi project, which currently still has $396,000. That project is aimed at improving the modi of Lake Tukituki, and more so improving hapu iwi capability and leadership within freshwater management through physical action. And so that 396,000 is to be spent on the riparian enhancement around the margins of Lake Tukituki. And that is the Te Waiu o Tukituki project.
Just a question, got the southern outlet to Opahi, can you tell, what's that all about?
Sorry?
You're telling us now you can put a drain?
That's probably the most expensive one, maybe that's why I dropped it off. That's
I was told it couldn't be done.
to promote longitudinal flow and also fish migration is an outlet at the southern end, and it involves a 200 metre, 900 mil diameter pipe connecting Lake Wakapiro with Lake Ōrākei. There's a 10 metre elevation difference. The value of that work's currently estimated at 675,000. But again, it's featured heavily in the community consultation to date as a desirable outcome. There's still work to be done on that. But in terms of facilitating elver access and enhancing the biodiversity values and the modi of the lake, that's seen as a pretty significant piece of work as well.
So why wouldn't you have that a bigger pipe and make all the water flow right through the lake and out the other end, rather than just doing a little circle at the head?
Cost. The larger the diameter pipe, my understanding is the cost increases significantly. It's not over the
I'd say doing the earthworks would be the biggest cost.
I'm with him on that.
What's that, sorry?
I'm with him on that.
Yes. Yep.
You're going to dig a pipe. It's just as expensive to put a 12-inch pipe as a 6-inch pipe. I can comment about that as a rule. The bottom was to be teaching because we've got 20-odd metres of cover is not inclination, so this will be directionally grilled. So it's actually a growing operation, so the cost is exponential associated with diameter on that. So we're looking at 600 to 900 mils in terms of keeping it at an affordable price. So it's not an exploration.
Councillor Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Steve. Just referring to annual plan submissions again, John Sheen made some points. He said, look, a grass carp don't work in there. All that they do, because it's saturated with nutrients, is they'll gobble up the plants, but then they just recycle the nutrients as they die, whatever. And he said what you should do is get rid of the grass carp, let the hydrilla, I think is the name of the marine plant,
Yes,
let it grow and harvest it, and that way pull the nutrients out of the water. So is that practical?
I don't believe so. Several things here, and I may ask you to comment, Andy, but we haven't scoped that out as an option as part of the hydrilla response and management. The hydrilla response is managed by MPI, not the Hawke's Bay Regional Council.
By who?
MPI, the Ministry for Primary Industry,
yeah.
And also under direction by Biosecurity New Zealand, I believe.
So they need to be involved, though, don't they? And
They are, and they undertake annual monitoring on the hydrilla.
Yeah, so Andy can add, but getting rid of hydrilla from the lake is really important. It's a very invasive aquatic pest. It's not very far to Waikaremoana from here. It's amazing that weed hasn't spread elsewhere. So it's a significant biosecurity issue, and that's the reason the grass carp were introduced. They've been proven successful in eradicating hydrilla out of Lake Eland, which is up off State Highway 5. I guess what this project's trying to do is address the symptoms of a broader problem of catchment management. So we're trying to mask through the aeration the effects of many decades of land activity, and harvesting weed is probably not a pragmatic solution for us. It's starting with masking those symptoms through the aeration, and then a longer term program to address appropriate land use and land controls in the catchment to avoid the ongoing arrival of nutrients.
So-
The nutrients are always going to cycle around in that lake, and the hard reality for that community and for us is that there is potentially many, many decades of work before we see that lake anywhere near what it used to be like. And
But
there's no silver bullet to that.
Are you saying that you wouldn't harvest hydrilla for biosecurity reasons?
We just couldn't, because hydrilla grows throughout a depth range around the lake. It exists buried under logs and crevices that you'd have to do with divers, and even then you're not going to be able to adequately clear it out. It'll survive in a tuber stage for up to 5 years, so you might harvest the plant but not get the tuber, and the tuber will just regrow. So you need a constant source of pressure on the plant to suppress growth, eradicate the tubers, and then eventually the system, the plant dies out. That's not something that would be practical or cost effective to do through harvesting.
Okay.
And there'd be a serious risk that you would miss it, or that you may end up with remnants that are then moved to another water body that hasn't got it.
But you're not actually doing anything about removing nutrients from the water that's already in there, are you?
That's your space.
Yeah, so it's often seen as attractive to remove the weed as a nutrient removal technique, but there's actually not that much nutrient bound up in the particularly the surface part of the weeds. So there is in the roots, there's heaps of nutrient in the sediment. So it's a lot of effort to go and rip out a lot of weed in the effort of trying to strip nutrient from the lake. Yeah, so that's one aspect as well. I'll talk to John about that. I didn't realise he'd put that in. We talk about all sorts of other things. That's one thing that, it'd be good just to discuss and make sure everyone's clear on the pros and cons of the different things we've tried.
Thanks
Chair.
for that.
Chair.
There's people over this side here, Chair.
I would just remind councillors that we have 12 other agenda items after this one, so have at it.
Well, just a few quick fire questions, Steve. Just going to that southern outlet to Opuahi. Firstly, that current outlet is going, around the other side of that range?
So the current outlet, the low flow connection or the historical inlet was here, and the current outlet is here.
No, I'm talking at the bottom left. So where does that currently flow to?
There is no flow. There is no flow.
There is no flow.
The inlet and the outlet are at the northern end of the lake complex. And so there's no,
So what's-
there's no connection.
Right.
So second question,
Yes.
what is the potential quantum of water, if it doesn't flow anywhere, that would be available if we do make that connection?
Okay, so currently during low flows, we're looking at around 300 litres a second.
From that Opuahi.
So if that's flowing in,
So
expect that-
if it's not going anywhere now and you've got available 300 litres per second, where's it going?
it's diverged, currently diverged.
Oh, okay, right.
Right.
I see. Then this last question is, instead of direct drilling, an open channel up to the road, would that provide the same solution there?
Just to, if you can clarify, an open channel,
The length of that blue line there,
yes.
other than the road. We wouldn't want an open channel on the road.
That's,
I can answer that, Steve.
okay.
Look, there is meters to the road, so we would have to create a platform just adjacent to the water level of the lake. So there's only meters to the state highway, we would set up from there. That then goes into a hill, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, I think it's 24, 25 metres high. That is on the southern side or the left hand side of that image that we've got to go through down to Baraka. So there is there's only a small dimension to the highway, and all the drilling is on the other side. I don't want to get down to I don't want to get down to the engineering of it. That's someone else's job. But what I want to do is step back at a level to a higher point, which is that the problem with the lake is the nutrients are in it. And what we're doing here is nothing to shift the problem of the nutrients. We're fixing the problems. Now, what you're proposing here is a solution which is going to help assist that, but it's going to be expensive. And implicit in Fenton's question was, what would it cost for us to do the job properly and to fix the underlying problem with the flow? So it seems to me what you presented to us here is it's a part-way solution, which you spend a lot of money on, what would it cost to do the whole job and do it properly? To get rid of the sediments, the nutrient. This is just masking the effect, actually, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, can I? Yeah. Look, first response to that is that the plan that we have presented and put together is an all-encompassing plan, so it's addressing the short-term problems, the fact that you can't swim in the lakes, and that's where the aeration comes into it. It's like putting the lakes on life support to clean up and prevent the algae blooms occurring. The integrated catchment management plan, the farm environmental plans, the subsidy scheme, that's all addressing the long-term solutions to clean up the waterways in the catchment. You're correct, what isn't addressed through this plan is the sediment or the nutrient or the phosphorus that's bound up in the bed of the lake. And options to remove: drain the lake, crop it for 10 years, maize, cart it off if that's even possible. What else has been talked about is to drain the lake permanently, and that's not acceptable, it hasn't been acceptable in conservation
You
today.
don't take the water. See, the problem is the water comes in one way, goes back out the other, and this drops to the bottom of the lake. And it warms up, comes up, goes up and down. It's in this enclosed system going. What you're proposing here is a pipe to come out the end, so you've got flow through the lake. So this is the first time we've seen an option which is going to have capacity to carry the nutrients out of the lake. All right. So what Fenton's asking is, if we develop the scheme properly, would it effectively carry the nutrients out of the lake when they rose up in a warm period, no problem, and cart them away, and over time solve the problem? Now, at the moment you're talking about a small pipe which ain't going to do the job, and so we're going to invest mega dollars over a long period of time just to maintain the status quo. So the question is being posed to you: what would it cost to effect a better engineering solution which may, in the long term, cure the problem?
Okay, I don't have the answer
Exactly
to
what
that
I said.
question.
So there's an assumption here that putting all of the water through the lake will be of benefit to the lake, and current scientific thoughts around that is that that's not the case. So even if all of the water from Papakeri goes through Tutera, it's still got a 2-year residence time. So it's not like that's going to provide a really quick flushing of the lake. A lot of that water is going to sit there, drop out all of the gunk that it's carrying. One new piece of information that's just emerged is that with aeration in the lake, putting all of the water from Papakeri in will be a different story. So, that might be something to revisit. But at this stage, the idea of putting all of that water through the lake won't help anybody. So the main benefits from this southern outlet in terms of water quality will be for Opawahi, which is the lake it's the third lake in that series, where there's just one little eel in there, because that's quite a small volume. And so putting Orokai, what did I say? Opawahi, that's even far away. That's the fourth lake. Yeah. So, that's 2 mistakes. Same mistake, just once. So that will be good for water quality, but in terms of Tutera, that amount of water going through isn't going to have the effects that people expect it to have. These arrows are much bigger than the actual amount of water that's moving through. So, yeah.
But the point is that you propose a solution, and we have got an analysis of all the other options that are going. See, on one occasion we're told that no throughput through the lake is its fundamental problem. Have water flowing through the lake will take the issue of phosphorus away in the longer term. That's what we were told. Now you come back and say, no, the science is wrong on that. Well, how did it go from being right to wrong?
Who told you that the throughput was good?
Well,
Sorry.
we were told that the problem was with the lake was that the water came in, carried the phosphorus in, the phosphorus then dropped into the bottom of the lake, and then the water went back out the same track, so there's no throughput. And one of the problems here was, if we had a throughput, when the phosphorus came up out of the bottom of the lake, the warmer part, because it's flow, would be taken away. And if we could stop the phosphorus coming in, then eventually the throughput through the lake would take it away. That's what we were told. I'm really listening to it.
So I guess, we're diving right into the tin tacks of the project, which is great. Happy to do that.
I don't want to do that. I just want somebody to come on and tell me we've got the right answer.
I guess the key for this exercise is that we're not locked into perpetuity to one kind of outcome here. The key thing for getting the long-term solutions for the lake is certainly going to involve cleaning up the entire catchment, and the bulk of the time and effort's going to be in the integrated catchment, the farm plans, the subsidy schemes, making Papakeri water quality improvements such that in time, in combination with perhaps aeration or other technologies as they emerge, there would be value in seeing more water go through the lakes, or there may be an alternative mechanism come up. None of this detracts from our options in the future, but it's a good starting point. And there's a risk that we could go and spend millions of dollars on an outlet structure that actually never has any benefit for us in the future.
Councillor Bevan.
So that goes to the heart of my concern. We've got $3.6 million of proposed expenditure here, and looking at the budget, it looks to me like only not much more than 100,000 is invested in catchment improvement, which is the farm environment management plans and whatever, and the vast majority is the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So I want to be satisfied that you're actually investing enough money in the solution to stop that becoming a permanent problem. Are you satisfied that the investment mix is correct?
Yes, I am, and I can say that because first of all, with the integrated catchment management plan and funding attached to that, the farm environmental plans is in the vicinity, and staffing resource closer to $1 million of the 3.6. There's 63,000 on farm environmental management plans, 500,000 for a subsidy scheme, 240,000 for a staff resource. Also coming to the point about this connection, the purpose of the project is to improve the modi of Lake Tutera. That's not necessarily to take all the nutrients out of the lake, and improving the modi. Connectivity is a major feature of that, and providing for fish passage into the lake complex, which is currently we have a major barrier by the way of a waterfall that Andy's been doing his best to overcome, but has proved extremely challenging. In terms of confirming that approach, there is still work to be done. Not so much in the engineering, unless we decide we really want to upscale it, but in terms of confirming community desire for that. But up until this point, there's been strong feedback from the community to create through flow through the lake.
So Steve, we need to move on here, and you need to move on.
Yeah, I do.
So,
Thank you.
mhm.
So we've got 2 more to go.
I'm going to sit down so you can all see the slide behind me. Right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicola McAfee. I'm a Senior Catchment Management Advisor in the Land Management team here at the Regional Council. So I'm talking today about the Tukituki River FIF funding proposal. So the Tukituki was identified by MFE as a vulnerable priority area for funding under this scheme, and there's already been a bit of discussion about it today. We're all quite aware of that. Tukituki is the first of our national policy statement plans for freshwater quality, which we're required to do for all of the Hawke's Bay catchments by 2025, and this plan became operative on the 1st of October 2015. So HBRC is already investing significant resources of time and money into the Tukituki catchment, as we're required to do through Plan Change 6. So this is happening through FEMP implementation, work in the priority catchments, which are significantly above their in-stream DRP levels. So those are the ones you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, as well as work in the priority catchments, which were identified through SEDNet as being high-risk areas for sediment loss. So those are the eastern catchments, the eastern side of the catchment, and the Mangatarata. So the FIF offers us the potential to double some of the existing spend in the catchment, which will enable us to boost activity, boost outcomes, and boost engagement. So we've applied for funding over 4 years, which lines up with the key dates in the Tukituki plan by 2020 regarding FEMPs and stock exclusion. The 4 main outputs are going to be boosting the erosion control plan part of FEMPs in those SEDNet identified high-risk areas, and also increasing erosion works in these areas, so that'll be planting 9,300 poles per year. We're going to be increasing riparian planting in those priority catchments which have the P and the bacterial issues, and so that's going to be 30 kilometres of planting over 3 years. And also creating 3 mitigation demonstration sites. So these are going to be places the local communities can go along to gain information, access, get a bit of inspiration around what to focus on for waterways and land management. So the total project value is 1.76 million over the 4 years, and that's got a contribution from HBRC and MFE of 767,000. It's important to note that the on-ground work component of this project represents an investment of roughly a third between MFE, HBRC as well as the landowner. So we're leveraging $2.86 for every HBRC dollar spent. So in summary, this project is looking at work that's already in place in the catchments, but it's going to allow us to do things faster, build momentum. It's going to also allow us to build good relationships with the landowners and communities. Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Walker?
The key thing to riparian plantings is the management of the plantings for the next year or two after they'll be set up. Is that all included in the cost?
No, it's just the cost of getting them in the ground, and then
So where's that going to be messed
the landowners who have put the plants in they would have to look after their own plants.
That's what it's going to die in a couple of weeks.
No, that would be pretty unfortunate. Yes.
So we're quite confident about the future of these things.
Yes.
Councillor Hewitt?
I would just like to address Mike Moe's comment. What about Lake Artuma? Because Lake Artuma, we consulted on that as part of our annual plan consultation, and it hasn't shown up in here. So I know it's part of this catchment, but where's the work for there?
My understanding is we've specifically left the application general as to where the priorities are, so can direct plantings that way also.
At the stage these were being developed, and appreciate, I think we had 2 or 3 weeks to pull them together, there was no project for Whatuma. So we've pulled together a package that allows us to move it around the catchment as we see fit, and Whatuma could be one of those. Of course, one of the challenges with the lake is that it is predominantly in private ownership, so there's quite a bit of work we'd have to do to negotiate what we want it to do. But it's certainly within the scope of the project if we're successful.
So this is all on private land as well?
I guess it's easier for us to achieve riparian outcomes in streams than it appears to have been in Whatuma in the past. I'm just aware that this council's historically invested a lot of time and money to try and get an outcome at Whatuma, and it's fallen over twice that I can think of because of conflicts between landowners and landowner views around the lake. Because if you're dealing with one landowner and a strip of land by the river that he owns, that's easier than having 17 landowners and talking about lake level management and getting agreement around that, or willow control or not. So it's a much more complex thing to address and is more challenging than a single landowner in a discrete bit of land. Not to say it's impossible, but it's just a lot more challenging.
Next up.
Just, Ian, are you saying then Lake Whatuma is not going to happen, or?
I wouldn't say it's not going to happen. It'll really depend on A, are we successful with the funding, and then B, can we pull a project together and get the community agreed on a common outcome there, whether it's willow control, lake level management, all of those things.
It just seems that Lake Whatuma seems to be the boogeyman, because every time it's mentioned we get the same story.
Yeah, and look, it's on the radar. It's certainly something that we want to address. All we're just flagging up is that if we look at the issues broadly across the catchment in terms of water quality, there's some real standout areas like the Papanui, the Maharakiki, the Kahakuri, where there are serious water quality issues that we may get quick and easier runs on the board than we can do at Whātuma. We would certainly engage with the community and see whether we can get a project of any, significance up and running there. But I'm just flagging that I don't think that'll be as easy as we could achieve in some other areas. If the community mood's shifted around there and there is a desire to and a common vision now, that's fantastic news, and would be very, very keen to get in their boots and all.
Just that 50% of the perimeters are now owned by one entity. But I agree with your sentiments, and the cost is probably prohibitive, even though I don't agree with not doing it.
And look, the other thing I'd just throw back at you also is that don't take it off the radar, because it's hard and difficult and costs a lot doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But maybe it's not something we can achieve in this project, but it might be generation 2 of your hotspots. Starting with a united community would be really helpful.
Well, we're not worried about the fellows on that side of the committee. We're united.
Yeah.
Councillor Ewan.
I'd just like to flag too that it raises for me a slight. I hear your concerns or your answers, but a credibility issue, and that was what was taken out in the annual plan consultation. So there is an expectation that there is going to be an attempt at delivery from the
Councillor,
community.
you accepted the role of advocate for this project at the last council meeting, as you may recall, under the chairman's mission to have councillors take responsibility for various of these hotspot areas. You were offered the opportunity, which you are now taking, to advocate for Whātuma as a project for the staff to get involved in. So the ball's in your court.
Could I just add to that? There's two things here. It seems to me that with Lake Whātuma, the key issue is the lake level. That's right? It's key issue, a whole pile of things, take on that. The second thing is that the money that's referred to about the annual plan, I don't know that we've got a cent in the door yet. When's the first cent due in?
Sorry, for your hotspot funding,
Yeah.
well, we've got that in the bank. We're spending that already. It's the
When's the
that's-
rates, part of the rates increase, so when's the first part of the rates increase due in?
well,
1st of July, of course.
yeah. So our budget year starts on the 1st of July, which we're into now.
Right, so how many days?
What are you doing this weekend?
That's my point.
Cool. Okay, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Andy from the water quality team. We'll be talking about whakakei today. I actually thought I'd take time just to give a bit of context to whakakei, because it's not a system that we talk about a lot at council. It hasn't been traditionally. And I don't think the proposal will make any sense unless I do this. So I'll try to do it as quick as I can. Good, yeah. So whakakei is one of these coastal lagoons that actually form because there's more sand and little gravel coming in from the sea than the water that's coming off the land can push out. So the river mouths close up, or the outlets close up, and then you get a lake and lagoon system that forms behind it. So that's why these things are here. Because there's no outlet, that water slowly rises and rises, and there's nice fertile land around these lakes that often gets converted to farmland, and as that lake rises and rises, it starts to cause all sorts of drainage problems, and that's a huge source of contention. So the ecological values are very much linked to the water level and a certain height of water, but obviously when it gets too high it starts to compromise those farming values, and that's going to be an ongoing battle with this system and other ones like it around New Zealand. We're already familiar with that in a lot of our rivers, so they get open quite regularly. And this one also gets open quite regularly, but the whole way that it goes, that relationship hasn't been worked out as well as we would have liked it to be, partly because of there not being any solutions and the relationships not being well formed. So part of this project is really aimed at trying to address that. And another thing I wanted to flag was that 20 years ago there was actually a healthy aquatic vegetation community in the lake, and that was when the lake was being opened straight to the sea. So that's the top arrow. The main body of the lake is in the background, and that top arrow is where it used to be opened. That had all sorts of damaging effects on the fringing wetland and bird life and eels and that kind of thing. And so there was a big effort to try to get an alternative opening, which is now done via the Rahui Channel. So there was a lot of blood, sweat and tears that went into that, and it's now being opened at the Rahui Channel, which does seem to have benefited the fringing wetlands and fish and birds and that kind of thing. But what it does seem to have done is enhance the water quality problems that you usually get in these kinds of lakes. So you can imagine when it was flushed straight to the sea, there was a more cleansing effect from that opening. When you drain it via a fairly convoluted channel, some distance from a lake, which actually has a sill on it that prevents it from draining too low, which is part of the reason this is a good option for the ecological values, but a bad option in terms of getting water quality outcomes. So 20 years ago it was in pretty good nick. Now it's in terrible nick. There was no vegetation at the last survey. So unhappy now, but what that does give me some confidence in is that it's not so much the average water coming off the catchment that's causing a lot of the issues. It was that accumulation and legacy effect in the lake. So if we can deal to that, then we've got a good chance of bringing back the aquatic vegetation that was there 20 years ago, stopping the ongoing algal blooms that have been happening, particularly when lake levels are low over summer. Nodularia is one type that actually produces a toxin that accumulates in eel tissue, so it's a really nasty one when people want to eat eels out of these systems. And it also directly killed fish. There was a couple of big dead fish turning up on the shore that was a bad look. They were goldfish, but still it's a bad sign. That lake level management causes conflict. That's huge for this catchment, and it's such a beautiful system. So it's our first listed regional wetland in our resource. What's that called? RRMP, the Regional Resource Management Plan. So huge values. Currently really underutilised in terms of people being able to get out there and look at it. So huge potential there to open that up. And also there's two marae in very close proximity to the lake. And there's half of the people I seem to talk to seem to have some kind of whakapapa to whakakī. There's a really strong cultural heritage up there, which again gives it that real potential for growth and development in ecological and cultural tourism type of activities. There's also, you'll be able to see these trees. They've started to come out, so that's causing a lot of concern, because even though forestry long term usually good for water quality, during the harvest period you get a lot of gunk coming down. So people are worried that the lake's going to take a turn for the even worse in the near future. So that's the background. Sorry.
On that map, can you please just show me where the log build-up was?
So in the Kopawafra, will that be the log build-up? You're not too far away, but yeah, it's sort of around here. So it's along the coast. That's a proper river system, if it's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah. Yep, that's
Andy, just
around the
before you
corner.
change slides, it looks to me like the lake in the foreground doesn't have any opening out into the sea. Is it a separate lake, or is it connected, or what?
It's a related lagoon. It is separated, and there's no outlet usually for this lake. It's usually only open to the sea for a few days at a time when it gets mechanically opened. At the moment, that happens there. So they'll dig a trench through there, and then it drains out with a hiss and a boom. This one doesn't get open as far as I'm aware. There has been talk about trying to create a more of a permanent fixture here and then drain it out that way. But yeah, this is just a separate lagoon. And yeah, there's actually a number of these all along. This is a really rich ecological area in terms of this kind of, lagoony coastal system. Yeah.
But that lagoon is part of what would be there naturally, so it is.
Yeah.
Those areas will all just have lagoons all the way along.
Yeah, this is about 10%. That's right, yeah, this is about 10%. So this would have been one continuous lagoon rather than, because the water level would normally be a lot higher. We're just managing it down. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not advocating going along and getting all of these draining to the sea unless there's a good reason for doing that.
Surely we should be restoring the lagoons because that's what we need is wetlands.
Yeah, yep, and part of this project is certainly going to try to help with that. Yeah, so jump into the actions. So I tried to make this gimmicky. So sunshine, wetlands and bees. So there's solar power, there's creating wetlands, and then there's trying to use manuka honey to add value to some of these areas. I talked about that rising water level. It was either the last season or the one before. Fenton, you probably know, when was that? When was the really, I think it was the last summer, the last summer. So this is farmland that you can see there that's covered with water. That straight line through the middle of the image is a farm track, and you can probably faintly see some fence lines. That's the kind of issue that's generated when the water level in the lake is higher than it's been designed to be in terms of the farming considerations. So one of the things that we want to do, rather than getting all upset or people getting upset and losing income when this land goes underwater, is actually try to encourage people to utilise different land uses which don't mind getting wet feet. And one of them is Manuka. Manuka actually does very well in these sorts of situations, just seasonal inundation. They don't mind a bit of salt either. Council's already dabbled in Manuka honey. And the good thing about these in comparison to Tiro is that they would grow quicker, and the quality of honey that you get out of wetland Manuka stock is higher it's the highest that you get. So really good potential there to try to utilise this Manuka. And there are a couple of other options that we could try if that doesn't pan out. There's a couple of species of eucalypts that don't mind wet feet, and there's probably some other options there if people want to dabble. But yeah, the idea will be to provide some funding to start to facilitate movement away from a land use which really struggles under these wet conditions. And then the other sort of major cost and thing aimed at improving the water quality is this idea of a recirculating wetland, which is this thing here. So pumping water out of the lake and then putting it through a wetland which cleans the water and then putting it back into the lake. So a very upscaled aquarium filter, if you like. The problem with this system is those floods bringing in a lot of gunk. The normal water quality in the streams entering the lake isn't too bad, but all of those flood deposits sit in the lake and get recycled. So if we can just chip away at them slowly using one of these recirculating wetland systems, and it would have two stages. The first would be discharge to land, which is very effective at removing sediment and phosphorus, and the second stage, which is more effective at removing nitrogen. We haven't confirmed where this could go. There's a bit of dockland, and they're happy to put it on their property. It's probably not the best spot to put it, but we can put the first stage there if we need to, if we can't find somewhere better in the short term. But it'll progressively occur, so there'll be a little bit done each year for 5 years, all involving this recirculating purifier type of concept. And then the project also, I should have mentioned, so Richard Brooking is the new chair for the Whakakē Lake Trust. He was instrumental in putting this program together, and they've got aspirations of trying to really empower the locals to do stuff, and also link in with local schools to turn Whakakē School into a bit of a centre of learning, and also link in with the nursery that's at Whakakē to provide plants and that kind of thing. So this project would feed into that to try to build capacity and local opportunities. And this is very much lake focused. There's other work on the back burner or being worked up. Nathan might be able to answer questions if you've got any questions on that, or James actually. And that'll be catchment focused. So this is lake focused to deal with the issue, try to get the lake swimmable in the short term while we tidy up the catchment and work out solutions there. That catchment thing is, there's a lot of discussions that need to be had. My understanding is that attempts that have been made in the past have really been a bit of a top-down, here are some ideas. So Nathan's really keen to let the community tell us what they think will work and then and try things on that front. But that'll be a different work stream.
Yes, sort of conflict of interest and tangata whenua of the area. I would advise the council to partner up with Ngāwhena Rāhui.
Sure.
They've spent $1.3 million over the last 15 years there, including the establishment of the nursery. And through squabbles within the hapu, it's now producing about 4,000 plants instead of the potential 100,000. So you've got a nursery there ready to go if they can get over themselves. Also around the edge of the lake, reading the report, you could be inclined to think that it's the Lake Trust that's involved. It's actually individual Maori landowners who want something, and what you're talking about in terms of the different options open for them, they're actually open for that. One of our big problems with Ngāwhena Rāhui, wearing the second of three hats, is that they they only wanted to do it, one wanted to do it and one didn't want to do it, and therefore to fence them individually became cost prohibitive. But if indeed through this Richard Brooking, who's very easy to get on with, he's worked with Para Horomia in the past, and if we can get them to sort of pull together and you only have one fence to keep the stock out instead of a whole lot of pepper potted there, this is actually very, this could work really well. But I'm just still tongue in the cheek about Hatuma. There's no talk about the Wairoa River in this, and there's talk about the lake. With ours, there's all talk about Tukituki and none about the lake. So I just thought I'd have that sixpence worth.
Thanks for those comments, Mike. The Ranganui Mackay is on the project team, so so he'll certainly be in the mix.
In the interest of efficiency, Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendations for both item 23 and item 13.
Well, Mr. Chair.
Any last discussion?
Yes, just one very brief question, probably of the Chief Executive and Mr. Maxwell, if you don't mind. I'm just
2 questions.
2 questions, either or. I've tallied up the total there, something like $10 million of desired spending in those identified catchments. We're likely to get something like 2 to 3 million in this first flush of the FIF. Can you tell me if we considered an investment, a capital investment of something like 7 million, would we be justified in approaching this priority in that manner? So capitalising this and lending these projects certain quantums of money for a mechanism of funding that I haven't quite worked out yet.
Look, I'll have a go at answering that. If it's capital off the balance sheet, for it to remain capital, it would need to be put into an asset, and the asset could be a loan to an entity such as a trust, and look, it needn't be necessarily interest bearing. But obviously if it's not interest bearing, it provides no income. But if it isn't interest bearing, then there certainly would need to be the ability to have recourse to get the money back at some point in time. Otherwise it's simply expenditure, and therefore the capital base of the council would erode as a consequence of that. I think as part of the capital review, we need to look at what are the mechanisms that exist, and we do have some already in the council's portfolio of services, and you can think about Heat Smart as an example, where the balance sheet is effectively leveraged and funding is provided to enable a community outcome, and that we do get the money back over time, and it sits as an asset on the balance sheet. So that's a model conceptually that I've asked our finance team to think about to support the discussion with councillors on the capital review and leading into the financial strategy.
But just noting on this last project, I'm seeing that $712,000 of the project is the presumed manuka plantings. So if those are income producing, could you break off chunks like that and say that's a capital?
Yeah, so we wouldn't own the land. One of the possibilities that we will be discussing with Dr. Weaver, who you heard of earlier, is whether or not there's an asset that we can retain by way of carbon. So carbon is something which is tradable between entities, that is a financial asset that you can book on the balance sheet as an asset. So in an example where we subsidise the planting of manuka, one of the things that we could do is that we could retain the carbon value as the council, and the landowner would get the benefit of the manuka for honey production, for example. That's not an unorthodox or uncommon arrangement around carbon markets, and certainly will be part of the mix for the options. Well, it all does depend on your forward projections around the price of carbon, certainly it will, and it also depends on the cost of establishment, etc.
So
you then do need to surrender the value of it.
Yeah.
Look.
There's been a mover and a seconder. Does anybody else feel a compulsion to comment on receiving these reports?
Yes, just as the mover chair, I'm excited by these projects. We've earmarked them as our hotspots, and I'm very pleased to see the alacrity with which our staff have moved forward with proposals since the start of the new financial year. So well done to you, and I look forward to Champion Hewitt banging heads together in Lake Whātuma and getting that on the table as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of very quick comments. Really pleased with the reports, Ian. If you could pass on to your staff. It was great to see the fires of enthusiasm in their eyes. Really good, really great. It covers off a number of issues for me, I think, which were raised in the long-term plan by submitters. One was what are we actually going to spend the money on? I think it gives them a fair idea for these particular projects. And also the expression, the interest that was expressed in actually doing something instead of just writing more reports. And these are very much action spends, so very pleased to see that happen as well. It would be interesting at some stage in the near future, obviously, to see what the plans are for the coastal spend and also the Karamu stream. I'm sure that's in train.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. 8, we're going backwards here, folks.
That's true. That's the worry.
So that's me, Chair. I'll try and take us forwards again. I'll keep my comments reasonably brief, and you can just quiz me on anything that you wish. So I guess just reflecting, coming out of the stage 1 findings was a very clear steer from the inquiry panel that the concerns around a lack of visible collaboration between the parties was something that could be addressed and should be addressed. I think we've already briefed you that following a meeting with District Council staff and Mayor, we committed to a collaborative process on the development of submissions and input to stage 2. The District Health Board have subsequently also joined us in that endeavour. Coming out of that, we've engaged Mitchell Dash Limited to help us coordinate those activities, so they're a shared resource by the parties. And the collaborative group has developed some objectives which are there in section 8 and principles in section 9. There has been stage 2 broken into 2 parts, 2A and 2B. 2A was what we called issue 8, which was ensuring that the safe supply of drinking water to Havelock North and Hastings was ensured. So there was a brief 3-day hearing in late June. Myself, Mr. Palmer gave evidence on behalf of the council, and there were many other parties that did as well. Certainly a very welcoming and inquisitorial approach from the panel to our new way of working, and very interested in and very keen to see our joint group provide them with some guidance and direction. I think that the indications are that we have potentially a great deal of influence in their thinking, which is good. In the meantime, we're developing more detail around what we're calling 2B, which is the more substantive hearing, which commences in August, which is much more into a list of issues that the inquiry's developed. There's 24 of them over 12 pages, so there are lots, some of which have no relevance to us. They're primarily public health matters or solely focused on infrastructure for drinking water supply. Some of them have relevance to all parties, and some of them are unique to us. So what we're doing is we're presenting or preparing a submission that pulls together the things that are common to all parties, and that will go forward, and that the various parties will also present their own bits that are relevant to them or unique to them. And there's actually a meeting this afternoon to work up a draft of that. Now, the focus for us is in the National Environment Standard for Drinking Water Supply, for the role of or the role of regional councils in the first barrier protection of drinking water supplies and a regional council consenting processes. So those are particular areas that we're focused on. And just my final comment would be just, I guess, a reminder in terms of the process that this inquiry will report later in the year, nominally in December. They make recommendations to the government, so they're a government inquiry. The government then will decide of those recommendations which they wish to pursue and how they pursue them, and no doubt embark on a further process, particularly if you're considering things like public policy or law reform, which are not things that you could do in the very, very compressed timeframes that this inquiry's got. So we will effectively get another bite at the cherry if the government elects to choose a particular bit of reform. Both this council and the regional sector generally would have another crack at that in terms of a submission process in the future. So happy to take any questions.
Questions?
Chair, if I
I'll
could
move
just...
the report be received, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second that,
Very
Chair.
straightforward.
Chair, just before we do, can I just advise councillors of one additional matter? The collective chief executives of the councils of the region have collectively agreed to present to our council as a proposal to establish a joint committee under the Local Government Act to oversee drinking water in the region, and I propose to bring a paper to you to your council meeting in July on that matter. The reason that we take it straight to council is that the inquiry is seeking some clarity of commitment, if you like, from the elected governors of the region to overseeing the performance of drinking water in the region, and we have the ability to form a joint committee under the Local Government Act, and we think that that's at staff level, we think that that's got merit, and that would have two elected representatives from each council sitting on it. Could be mayors and chairs, it could be other councillors, to oversee all of the work that's done around drinking water in the region.
Any question about that?
No, I just want to say thank you for that, and speaking to the motion, so I support it. And I just want to say to the Chief Executive, you've defaulted to the time-honoured tradition of New Zealand. When anything's a problem, form a committee. So everyone understand this, we've got a committee now. But I really want to get to the heart of the problem for me. Now we can have processes and committees and all this, but what they criticised was the relationship. And what I wanted from you is an honest assessment of what is the status of the relationship between this council and Hastings, and what we need to do to improve it, if anything. So that's to me is the most important thing. What is the status of it? What needs to be done to improve it, if anything?
Councillor, I think the inquiry's stage 1 report was salutary in this regard. I think staff within both organisations are acutely aware that this is a fundamental issue that sits in behind this incident. I'm talking to the Chief Executive of the Hastings District Council several times a week, including on these matters. Mr Maxwell speaking with his counterpart, Mr Thew, almost daily on these matters. There is a high level of collaboration around the joint working group, and I think the relationship is fundamentally different. I think it's possibly not entirely without tension still, because there are difficult matters that lie ahead, and the Brookvale bore field is an example of those where Hastings District Council is under a lot of pressure and strain in solving its water management issues, and it's still got a consenting process to go through with us. So there is a degree of inherent tension in that, but the relationships and the communication is good, and I think the lack of communication was the issue previously. We've resolved that, and I think with good communication we can manage any of those tensions that lie ahead satisfactorily.
And only yesterday I saw our chairman having a tete-a-tete with the acting mayor of Hastings City Council at Cafe Mena, if that puts you at any further reassurance.
I'm even more worried.
We, I think, had a mover and a seconder to accept the report. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried? Okay. Great leap forward to number 11, Catchment Management Plan.
This was a political failure.
Hmm?
Great leap forward was a political failure.
Yeah, well. maybe we'll break precedent. Yeah.
Right. So this paper brings together a bit of thinking that I've had on the go for a wee while now, reflects a number of conversations I've had with my peers throughout the country, with staff in this building, and more recently with European agencies who are involved in freshwater management, and is a paper that's designed, it hasn't presented you with any particular direction of travel or any particular outcome, but is designed to stimulate some thinking and a conversation about a different way of working, and just stressing it's probably reflecting very much not necessarily what we're doing but how we're doing it, and it kind of draws together some of the challenging conversations we've had around achieving outcomes, in particular catchments over the time, and my sense of frustration, particularly at a governance level, that you're not seeing outcomes from the work we're doing, or you're not feeling like there is enough collective understanding or integration across the council of our work towards outcomes. And perhaps a really good example of this, or the most obvious one, if you like, is when we think about and talk about biodiversity. So biodiversity doesn't sit in one particular place in the council at the moment in terms of our operational structure, but it's fair to say that pretty much all of the work that we do across council has biodiversity ramifications and potential impacts, usually benefits. But we don't bring it all together into a coherent story, and we don't talk about it and report on it in terms of the outcomes of the integration of all that work. So there is an opportunity for us to think about working differently and achieving more. So integrated catchment management is a term that's been floating around for some decades, and there's various forms of it. So it's not a new concept. One of the best examples in New Zealand was a fairly lengthy study of the Motueka catchment in Tasman district. That was a collaborative exercise of a bunch of agencies led by Landcare, heavily involved the local community and provided some really tangible opportunities and ways of working that haven't really been picked up broadly across the country yet. The key is that it's a process, and it's not managing a physical system in isolation from the land and people within it, which is a key part. It's what I call transdisciplinary, so it doesn't, as compared to multidisciplinary, so it's not about saying get a bunch of people together in the room from different disciplines and get them talking. It's about encouraging people to think and work across the disciplines and think and work in the space that isn't their domain necessarily. Whilst you still retain the experts in a particular domain, it's fair to say that people who work in one area will have thoughts and reflections on an area that's not necessarily their speciality that will benefit the overall understanding and story. And the concept of transdisciplinary work is something that's becoming increasingly prevalent in science generally, is that you can often draw from others who aren't necessarily the experts some insights into your own work. And it's systems thinking, and it's not just responding to the problems that we're seeing day to day. It's trying to go to the cause and then address it. So our problem or opportunity, so it's often presented to you as a problem when you often hear about what we call our wave of freshwater reform coming at us and the challenges that presents. And reality is that it is, but I think we probably dwell too much on that at times because it potentially offers also opportunity for us. And there's a danger that if we focus too much on the challenge, we end up with wheel spin, and we don't deliver, we don't provide anything, we don't do anything, and the outcomes that are anticipated aren't achieved. And notable that in the recent clean water reform package the government announced 6 months ago, and you've all seen a copy of, is a strengthening up or a beefing up of the policy around integrated catchments and expectations that councils are managing in a more integrated way. I mentioned earlier that many of our activities are cross-cutting, so biodiversity again is a good example. But either the policy requires it, or if it's not in policy, the broad community expectation is of a particular outcome, and that outcome is going to be contributed to or achieved through the actions of many parts of either this council and or the actions of others outside of council. And again, biodiversity is a really good example where the actions of the Department of Conservation, Osprey, Fish and Game and others all have impacts and benefits on biodiversity outcomes, and you could and can achieve a lot more if you are integrating and coordinating those activities, and the biodiversity strategy is seeking to do that. So it's dealing with these cross-cutting issues. It's something, again, that the Europeans have recognised. They actually recognised quite some time ago when they developed their various directives they have for things like nitrogen across Europe. And more recently, their work has sort of had them come to realise that achieving the multiple outcomes expected by these various directives in a kind of a siloed agency way is unlikely to be successful, and the development of these second generation regional catchment basin plans has them working in a far more integrated way, and to the point where agencies like the English Environment Agency are now appointing catchment directors whose role is to pull together and coordinate the activities of not only the English EA but also other agencies that may intersect with their work. So it's also a way that two regional councils in New Zealand have either been working for a little while, in the case of Bay of Plenty Regional Council, or have more recently dived into in the way of Waikato Regional Council, and they've now formed catchment units, catchment groups, and they have a role to reach across the cross-cutting issues, bring them together and coordinate and integrate council's activities. As I said earlier, it's not about what we're doing necessarily, but how we do it. So it's not that we need to knock the machine down and start again. The vast majority of the work that we do is important and will continue to be so. We tend to focus very much on, like I say, we tend not to focus on the outcomes. So when we're talking about our activities or we're reporting it, we're not talking about the outcomes that we want to achieve. We're very focused on the systems and the processes that might get us there, instead of the outcomes that we want, and whether we can achieve those outcomes in the way that we're operating. So there's much that we can glean from those who are either doing it or those that have gone before us, and we're doing that already. We've been, like I say, thinking about this for a while. One of the other things that we're actively pursuing at the moment with the University of Waikato is to look at whether we can pull together and fund a professorial chair in integrated catchment management based in the region. It's a model that has been used by other councils. There's the Bay of Plenty Regional Council support a marine science chair. I forget exactly what Chris Batterseal's title is, but he's based in Whakatane and works on a range of projects through the university with the regional council. Professor David Hamilton was, until very recently, chair of the Lakes faculty, or the Lakes chair, co-funded by regional councils. He's unfortunately moved to Australia, but they're recruiting to replace him. So there are models that go before that exist, that bring together this partnership with universities and regional councils. We're very interested in seeing whether we can pull one together that focuses on integrated catchment management, with a heavier focus on the people rather than the biophysical. So it's not just about science and modelling, but it's very much about people, place and behaviour, and how we can achieve and how we can influence and achieve the outcomes that we want. recognising that, integrated catchment management, like I said before, is land, people and process. It's not one in isolation of the other. So there's a bunch of benefits that might come out of working this way. Outputs and efficiencies, the kind of good bureaucratic stuff I'd like to tell you about, but I think it is really important, outputs and outcomes. We're thinking about ecosystems, not just functional activities, so it's trying to move away. Not that I think this council works in a siloed way at all, and I'm not suggesting that. I think there is a relatively good level of integration, but I think we could probably do better. It gives us the ability to have stronger connection to Māori because they think and see things differently to Europeans, and certainly in a holistic and integrated view is my sense of how Māori see the world and what they would probably like us to see as well and talk more of and report more about. A much deeper and greater level of engagement with our communities and stakeholders and partners. Much more place-based and outcome-based reporting, so we can come back and report in a manner that I think you folk and our communities are looking for. And importantly for the staff is that they're going to start to see a greater level of, or greater understanding of the impact of their work, which is often, a small cog in a big machine, a much greater impact of their work when it's integrated into an overall outcome. So what am I after from you is, I know you will have all read and thought deeply about the paper. I've posed a few questions in there. Like I say, it's starting a conversation. I'm interested very much in your reactions and your views and thoughts. If there is some sense that you want to take this further, then I'll go away and do that through the long-term plan.
Councillor Bevan.
So if I understand this correctly, in what you're talking about here is multidisciplinary groups, I suppose, from within the council working on projects or catchments, rather than having silos of planners, engineers, etc.
You'd still retain all of the functional specialists that you need to do the job.
Yeah, but my point is it's an obvious thing to do. So why is it that it hasn't been introduced to regional council processes before now? And second thing is, what are the downsides? Like if somebody leaves, or there must be some reasons why we haven't worked like this in the past.
Well, I guess the reason why is look, I'm not a long time in regional councils, but there's an element of doing what we've done because that's the way we've always done it. There's kind of been the need to have some areas of focus and areas of specialisation and people getting on and doing their jobs. And we've had quite a different legislative and policy environment in the past than we've got today. So we've only just recently, in 2011, had our first bit of central government direction on freshwater. But prior to that, for 20 years prior to that, there hadn't been a great deal other than a bit of legislation. So I think it's probably an evolution that's occurring at the moment, in a recognition that actually for us to achieve and deliver all these things and meet the expectations of communities, that we can't carry on doing it the way we've always done it. We're going to have to do it a bit differently. And the expectations that communities want to see, not just a report about, I don't know, and I'm not picking on anything or anybody here, but number of poles we plant, that's an important thing, but how is that linked into an overall program of work, and what are the outcomes that we're seeing from that overall program of work? How does it all fit together, and what are the outcomes that we're getting either today or that we expect in the future? So that's been the bit that's missing, and that's the way that working like this could offer us. And it's how it's worked in Waikato and Bay of Plenty, I don't know with any great detail, but I intend to go and find out and to figure out what they see has worked for them and what hasn't.
Look, I might add that I don't think that we've hardwired this approach into the business. So it's happened through people sharing information internally, seeing opportunities for different parts of the organisation to work together on a very ad hoc basis. And the projects we saw before, the 4 Freshwater Improvement Fund projects, are great examples of where you've got land management, you've got science, you've got assets, you've got policy and planning, you've got a whole bunch of multidisciplinary teams that have come together from across the organisation, bring those proposals together. That is not actually all that typical, and it's not fundamental to the way we operate. It's more opportunistically arisen. And I guess what we want to do is formalise this approach and move our reporting to that approach and it will have a bearing on the conduct of this committee and other committees of council, I think, over time, because where we'd move to is rather than different departments reporting to you on functional areas such as gravel management and the Tukituki, we'd come and report to you on the Tukituki, and we would explain all of the different bits that the council are doing across those different functions, and what is the sum of all of that activity and what is it delivering in terms of outcomes. In an ideal world, we'd end up with a bit of a dashboard that you would have for each of the major catchments, and you could see in the Tukituki is water quality going up, soil loss going down, the sub-regional GDP going up, what's happening with the population in there. You'd get a multiple perspective across the different parameters for which the council's got an interest. So we know that we have this disaggregated level of activity in various places, and we'd just like to move to the space of this being the norm that's expected by you as governors of the organisation, and then gives us the mandate to drive that in a more hardwired sense into the business.
So would you use, for instance, the 4 management plans that we just talked about in the previous item as a let's get going with this and see how it works?
As a trial, yeah. And look, we were thinking about the Tukituki particularly, given that it's a major catchment as a trial example in that regard. And I guess you asked the question before about what's the downside, and I guess the slight reservation among staff can be what's often thought of as matrix management, such as not clear accountabilities. And I guess the way we propose to transcend that is, as Ian said, people retain their functional groupings within the organisation and line accountability through management for those, but that we create coordinator roles, and it would be in the case of the Tukituki, you've got a councillor that would have an advocacy role for that, and they would work very closely with one individual in the council who's designated to know on any given day what's the totality of the work that the council's doing in the Tukituki, and is playing a coordinating role, so you can oversee all of it and how it all hangs together and how it is mutually dependent.
So I mean, I'm happy with the approach, and I'm certainly happy to trial it. But the critical thing from our perspective is to set the target, set the budget, and make sure that you've got milestones that you're reporting to, so that we can monitor what's going on. And as long as that fits and is integrated into what you're describing, then we should try it.
Yeah. And look, I think at the moment when you pore over budgets and see, what asset management's doing out there in terms of, looking after flood management, you don't necessarily see how that's contributing to the health of a catchment, such as the Tukituki. You're looking at the whole business through a functional lens rather than an outcomes lens. Certainly in the way we communicate them. So we're thinking about how we present this in the long-term plan in a way that makes sense to communities.
Councillor Barker.
I'm interested in this, but look, I'm getting old and I've seen these things come through phases and so on. And we've gone from places where we just had specialists and they worked in the specialist field, and then we had generalists, and the generalists did this. And I sense in a way that I've heard this echo somewhere before. So I'm not going to debate that aspect for you. But what I do want from this is I don't want to come along and have this change here without seeing it in its context. And it seems to me that we're going to be having some changes around the way this entity works in the future because of a whole range of other things that are happening. And I think this has to be fitted in the context of that. And I want to be convinced that this is going to be a process which is fit for purpose for where we are going. And I think if you look at soccer coaches, some will have 2, 4, 4, 1. And then others will have a 3, etc., etc. So if you're going to turn up with a new structure of how you're organising the people on the paddock, I don't want to be ad hoc. I want you to come along here and say, we're going to do this, and then we can run the rulers over it and see whether the rhetoric actually matches the actuals. I'm a cynic on this, and I see Ian's got a few new buzzwords in here. And once I get some new buzzwords, my suspicion things go up. So I want to see whether it actually delivers, runs on the board or not. I want to see it in its context of its whole. So
Let me
just to
assure
open
you,
the bonnet.
you will
And now
see
you're
the whole
cross-cut.
picture. Look, the executive's thinking about this as a key element of the totality of the organisation's operating model, and operating model being the jargon for how do we organise ourselves and deliver our work. So this will underpin some of the thinking about how we will reorganise, and that, as I've undertaken already with the council, will be brought to you by way of workshop in the next couple of months.
So we'll move on to Debbie, then Brian, then Alan.
I get the concept of where you're going with this. One of my concerns, and Peter brought it up initially, what are the cons? We've got the pros, but what are the cons? If we were going to spend half a day looking at the Tukituki catchment, for instance, and James, you just said, and you've got one councillor advocate, well, I actually don't buy into that. I think we're all responsible. We all signed on for the whole region. So I would caution against having a whole dedicated point in, just where people are presuming there's one councillor responsible, and the rest of the table's bored and may or may not turn up, and and they sort of say, well, like we got before with Lake Artuma, it's my problem. Well, I think that's just nonsense. So that's my caution in what you're doing, but I do see the integrated sense, and I think it works, but I think we should all be on the journey as councillors.
Look, absolutely, and I guess our vision is that the councillor advocate, for want of a better term, would almost be sitting there able to present alongside the catchment director, again for want of a better term, about what's going on there, recognising that all councillors don't have enough hours in the week to dive deeply into each catchment across the region, but that most councillors will have some area that is particularly germane to the community that they represent, and will want to have a deeper level of engagement. And from a staff perspective, having a councillor, and it could certainly be more than one councillor, that's taking a great interest in an area of geographic area of the region and working very closely with us, and particularly in terms of engaging the community, we see as highly advantageous.
Brian?
I just wanted to make a suggestion, and that is, why don't you just give us Maoris the money and we'll get the job done?
Thank you for that. Okay.
I tried that with Mike once.
I got a new car.
Councillor
Well,
Dick.
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's appropriate for the staff to proceed to develop this. We've signalled for a long time that we do want an integrated approach, and we do want to work on the basis of setting outcome goals. So, in fact, I'm prepared to move the recommendation with the addition that staff be encouraged to further develop the integrated catchment management concept.
Councillor Bailey, would you? Okay. Would you like to comment further?
Apart from
No, I thought he said his piece.
Yeah, I've said my piece.
Yeah.
So has everyone else.
Thank you, Chair. Ian asked for feedback on this particular paper, because he looked at it as just starting the conversation, and whether the approach was right. I think this approach is absolutely the correct way to go. We need to find the details, open the bonnet and see what's inside first, and that's fair enough. But in terms of the approach, absolutely the way to go, because one of the things I've found in my role as advocate for Tūtera is I'm really enjoying getting in there in the deep end. I'm really enjoying getting involved with the community up there, and I think it's been really, really beneficial for them to see a councillor turn up to community meetings and get their hands dirty. So in terms of the approach, I think that's I ran out of metaphors for excitement today, I think, because there's been quite a few things I've been excited about, and this happens to be one of the papers in, so thank you very much for bringing it to us.
If I could comment, I think the previous agenda item about the 4 hotspots, if you go back and look at the budgets that were presented and the action plans, they really do represent, I think, the template of what we're looking for here and what we're talking about, because these plans clearly are drawing upon various areas of the organization's capability to deliver, and it's budgeted accordingly. And so if this were an approach that wound up addressing the lion's share of the work we do, there might still be other areas that were cross-cutting areas. It seems to me that'd be a no-brainer, really. When you look at these, you finally have the sense that somebody has put their arms around a whole problem and thought through what are the moving parts here and what do we need to deliver against those, and how could you argue really against that? Any other comments? Otherwise, we'll take the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Stormwater update. Well, I think after this one. After this one. After this one.
Ni hao.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just start and then Wayne Wright will carry on just to give you an overview of basically the District Council consents. We've just done an overview of the stormwater consents that are held in the region. Something like 294 we counted stormwater consents. Most of those are to individuals, and there's something like 35 I think we've got issued to the district or TLAs. The regional plan has a rule in it which allows that the discharge of stormwater can be a permitted activity. It becomes needing a consent if it can't meet the conditions of the permitted activity. And one element of that is if it's coming from an industrial site over 2 hectares, or an industrial site that has hazardous substances stored or being used in processing on the site, so is a higher risk. So a lot of properties, stormwater feeding off just a pure residential area wouldn't necessarily need a stormwater consent. That could occur as a permitted activity. So often what we find is that in the residential situation or the urban situation, there's a lot of housing, and then there's a service station or something with hazardous substances. So once one of those shows up, generally that then puts them into the space of needing a consent. So HDC, for example, has got consents around most of its area because it's got just enough of the non-complying activity to then turn it into a consenting requirement. And then there's, as I say, there's a lot that are just independent stormwaters because the activity is an industrial site in its own right. So there's a number around sort of the obvious industrial areas around the regions, along Mahu Road, Te Moana, Whakatu, Awatoto. But that's probably just the overview. I'll hand over to Wayne to take you through the district.
Yeah, thank you.
So are you saying to me that if we just have a stormwater off a house roof into a drain, into a pipe and goes into a drain, there's no requirement to have a consent for that? The only point that it gets a consent is if it's got some industrial site or some site which has some toxic chemicals in it.
Principally, so a house or houses, a subdivision or an area of housing, just housing, which is networking its stormwater into a drain system and then discharging, does not need a resource consent for the discharge. It's provided for as a permitted activity in the plan.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Because there might be something that perhaps you could explain too, Malcolm, because you look at, say, for example, like the Onikawa industrial area. Now, they don't have individual consents generally, say with the likes of the regional council, but they do with Napier City Council, don't they?
Some of those areas will be networking into the Napier City Council stormwater, and Napier will be applying its bylaw back to individual properties. So individual, and even the residential ones, if residential properties are feeding into a council stormwater system, there are bylaws which the councils are applying to make sure people behave correctly in terms of feeding stormwater into that network. And that could be residential or it could be industrial feeding into the network. But if it's residential and it stands alone and there's no industrial or hazardous contaminants going into that system or at risk of going into that system, that could actually operate as a permitted activity.
No consent.
Without consent.
Okay, moving on to I suppose the monitoring and relationship with the TLAs. I just want to start with a bit of an overview before going into some of the things which I've spoken of here. You'll be well aware of previous comments I made about I suppose how we were a little bit frustrated with the level of, I suppose for want of a better word, of cooperation we were getting from the regional council, the TLAs. I think what's happened most recently with a little bit of sabre rattling, and I suppose that whole issue has come more to the fore now with the likes of the Havelock North Water Inquiry. Things have moved along very, very well since the last time I spoke to you. The relationship between our staff has always been very, very good. Where we have kind of fallen down, I suppose, in terms of not receiving information in a timely manner, which has been the main issue with us, is I suppose there's been too much good cop and not enough bad cop. Where we've been really relying upon the goodwill of each other to supply information in a timely manner, and when it wasn't received, we'd go back and we'd ask for it again, and we'd still be waiting. So it's a little bit like waiting until if you like, it's like a home situation where mum might keep saying you wait till your dad gets home, you wait till your dad gets home, and but the child still keeps misbehaving. But when dad comes home and says something, something gets done, and that's what we've found is happening now. In terms of the relationship between people at my level, we are speaking, we're meeting, and we're getting things done now. So we're a little bit disappointed, even within my own team. I felt that we didn't have, we weren't asking with enough, I suppose, mongrel in us for information which was required and wasn't given to us. So we have now changed that, and so we have been quite, I suppose, quite resolute in asking for information and telling them that it's needed by a certain time and why, and that's also been discussed with management at my level, and that message has gone down to staff at those councils. Getting on to the Hastings District Council and our relationship there, as I say, always been very good. The issues that I've outlined in this paper, I'll go through those just quickly, and I'll just make a bit of comment around some of those as well. Let's say overall they are compliant in that area, and the small number of technical compliance issues that I've outlined are some of them. And these are, a technical non-compliance is essentially a thing like not supplying some information in time, not supplying it at all, rather than, say, for example, if it's a discharge where, for example, you're only allowed to discharge a certain amount of something. If they are, we measure that, and if they are not doing that, then that is not a technical non-compliance. That is just a straight non-compliance. Whereas the technical talks more about the paperwork and things like that. So in this first one, we talked about a spill incident table being supplied to us. Now, what that is, whenever there is an incident, say on a roadway or somewhere in Hastings, there could be something from as little as some oil spilt out of a car parked on the side of the road, where it's might have run off and been captured in a sump. That is a minor spill, and that is captured in the spill table, which HDC do compile. What they are required to do by their consent is actually supply that information to us when it happens. They hadn't been doing that, but at the same time they had been collating that information for themselves and keeping it, and they weren't sending it all through to us, basically because they believed it was minor. And like the example I gave you there of something going into a sump, and they've gone out there and they've cleaned it out, they've thought there was really no reason to tell us, which in effect there is no real reason to tell us, because it's something minor. And it's been.
Am I able to ask a question, Chair?
Sure.
I'm a little confused, Wayne. On one hand, you say that we've got a really good relationship with Hastings District Council staff.
Mm-hmm.
Yet on the other hand, you're saying even though they're required to advise us when there's spills, they considered that they were insignificant enough that they wouldn't bother complying with that. I'm a little confused.
Well,
To me, those two statements don't collate.
I'm still in the middle of explaining that, and it might come a little bit clearer. So that has been their rationale for not reporting it to us, but they have been collating that information. Since I made that known to them that we do require that information, that is a requirement that they have supplied that information to us, and in fact it's evident by the information they are supplying that they have made that decision, and I think based on the facts themselves, probably insignificant. It's just that they are required by their consent to supply it. So it's not as if it's not captured. They capture it, but they haven't been giving it to us.
I'm sorry, I'm still really confused. I mean, the whole thing that's coming out of Havelock North is this lack of this relationship issue between territorial authorities and the district council. This is not, I'm not specifically pointing out Hastings District Council, this is just who you're talking about at the moment. That you're saying that you've got a good relationship with these people, and yet they feel that they don't have to comply with their consent requirements because they don't believe it's significant enough to have to do anything about it. I'm sorry, it's more of a statement. I'm just a little bit confused about that.
Okay. In terms of, if I could just quickly respond to that, I stand by my statement that the relationship is good. Okay. Now they've made a judgment call, which technically was not theirs to make, and that it has been rectified. And at the end of the day, I suppose I'd be pretty comfortable in saying if there has been any major incident which has had an impact on the environment as such, which has required some serious mitigation, then we have been involved. They let us know about the big things, if you know what I mean, the things which, if say for example, it hadn't been collected and the sump had gone into stormwater, then we would have been told. So that's the level of that. So since the beginning of this year, when we spoke to them about that, they have now supplied every little bit of information to us in their reporting. The second issue there is about the annual sediment sampling was not undertaken in 2016, and without consultation with us, they engaged MWH to analyse that data to identify better methods to identify high-risk areas. Now, that of course is using the same, I suppose, measuring stick that you speak of there, Mr. Bailey, same situation. I think, though, we have, in fact, Malcolm and I met with them and MWH last week about this very issue and about their applying next year for a new stormwater consent or modifying the one that they have. What they did, it really I think it came down to communication. If they had sat down with us before making that decision themselves, we probably would have agreed that that's probably a very good way going forward. So once again, it came down to the communication, which has now been, as I say, resurrected, and we're now working with a group on their whole stormwater strategy in Hastings, which we think will be a good way going forward. The last point there too was about they had an annual compliance report which was 9 days late, but they had told us before that it was going to be late for their reasons, and it was received on time. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about with technical non-compliance. The stormwater manager has been at Hastings District Council, been there about 8 years now. We find him very, very good to deal with. He's very competent, we believe, and I think in most recent times with our new commitment to working with each other and sitting down and communicating and meeting is going to be positive going forward.
So I have a couple of questions, if I could interject here. On page 79, which is this dashboard report that we now get from staff on things that are happening or in the pipeline that might bite us in the butt at some point.
Yes. Yep.
There is a mention of NCC, HBRC, Stormwater, Ahuriri estuary, non-compliance, catchment plans, sampling required, advised enforcement action will be taken if not received by 31/7/2017.
Yes.
What is that all about?
That's actually held in the next part of the paper at Napier City Council. What that is about is the was spoken about earlier on about the stormwater discharges up in the Ahuriri estuary, the Onehunga Road and the one up behind the airport. They, as you know, they were unconsented, and after a lot of asking and not receiving, they were required to put in an application for resource consent. And so back to the sabre rattling situation where we made that known to them that there would be enforcement action if it was not received forthwith. They are now deeply involved in that process, and as recent as yesterday when I spoke to them, they have engaged a consultant, and they are meeting with science and consenting staff here at the Regional Council, I think next week, and they have said that they will have their resource consent application in by the end of the month. That's what that's about.
There's also a reference to Central Hawke's Bay and wastewater, and in your paper itself, it's noted that CHBDC has no active stormwater consents at present. They've made application for consents. I assume those are stormwater consents?
Yes.
So I'm a little unclear about that situation, because my understanding has been that one of the concerns about the workability of their wastewater treatment all along has been stormwater infiltration and overloading of the system and what have you. So when I saw this, it sort of, so are we, do they have consents or not that affect their ability to actually deal with wastewater treatment?
They do. They have their wastewater consent, which is separate, but it does have reference to managing infiltration. So they've got obligations on that consent to be monitoring how that is operated and to be working towards reducing infiltration. That their extended pond recently is partly because they're saying there is infiltration. So there's not a proper fix in there yet, and they've got arguments of cost of infrastructure repair and so on. They can demonstrate. Might come back to some of Wayne's observations, but they do report on programs for monitoring and upgrades, and they program upgrades in their infrastructure, but at the same time they're still seeing infiltration.
So if we in a situation like that feel, and apparently this was an argument made historically about Napier, that there were people running around saying their infrastructure investment in stormwater was lagging, and then indeed all of a sudden the system is overworked and we have sewage going into the Ahuriri estuary. Do we, similarly to this situation, do we have any role in actually saying your management of stormwater is deficient to a territorial authority and these upgrades must be accomplished?
Yes, we do. So we've got Central Hawke's Bay is not a good example because they have sat outside the consenting space until now. So they've got historic infrastructure. It's been managed without consent, so without sort of oversight from the Regional Council. We're just in the process of consenting, so the consents have been processed and we've put them back to the District Council for them to have a last look at before we issue. Partly so that they can actually comment on the practicality of conditions, and we can have some conversation about how achievable some of those conditions will be across time. But that then starts to introduce some monitoring, some upgrade obligations on them. So they haven't been very active from my perspective in managing that system or characterising the nature of the waste that's coming through the system. This is getting them to the point where they are being conditioned to actually have better oversight of that, which with a bit like the Thames Tyne build, it's there, it's established, we can't sort of undo it. We need that infrastructure operating, but it could be a lot better. So let's start to work towards that improvement. So that's where we're going with the Central Hawke's Bay. Get that characterisation, get a better understanding of your system, get into a state where you're reporting and advising and informing us and the community sort of how it's operating. So that's where that's going. With, I think there's still some friction about how that then leads to better management across the two services of stormwater and sewage capture and discharge.
I've been kind of curious as to why we had an odor problem with tomato mushrooms, and we were all over that, like a bunch of ticks on a dog. And I'm reading constantly in my favorite newspaper, the CHP Mail, that there are odor issues that are, and no one has come our direction with those complaints?
Yeah, actually, with that, actually, that was something that I kept waiting for too, for people to turn their guns on us for the regarding the odour. But I think that the essential difference between the tomato mushroom situation, the Central Hawke's Bay situation, is that Central Hawke's Bay have actually taken the bull by the horns there and are actually doing something really quite proactive with the community to try and do something about it. They're visible. They're certainly working with their community and are looked upon by their community to being responsive. That wasn't happening in the tomato mushroom situation, and so it fell upon us to do the right thing. But here we're in a situation where we're luckily with Central Hawke's Bay taking it seriously and are spending a lot of money and resource to try and sort that out.
Are we doing questions now?
We'll do questions.
Yes.
On the, can I just follow up on the CHP move to Wairoa District? Well, I was stunned when I read this, as they have two freezing works, meat processing that in Central Hawke's Bay. They have no resource consent.
No, they do, but they're not. But they are their own resource consents. They're not TLA consents.
council.
Yeah.
Wow. And then you've got garages and other places down there. And same with Wairoa District. I just for the life of me can't see how we don't have a consenting process to ensure that what's being put in the wastewater, stormwater, whatever, is to a certain standard.
I think that there's a difference there when you're talking about municipal stormwater consents and business consents. Businesses have got to have consents in that kind of situation to discharge.
But it just left me feeling that this is not as tidy, the ship isn't as tidy as it should be.
I would tend to agree, and I think you'll see what we've done in what's happening in Central Hawke's Bay, where now they are now being consented for their stormwater. I would imagine that'll be the next step of Wairoa.
Well, I think so. I want to see something come out of this, that we have a really clear plan, that we have got appropriate consents for whoever it is, and if you're putting water into any of our streams, then it is up to a certain standard, and anything less than that's unacceptable, and we're onto it. I don't get that sense from this paper. I get this, tell me we're moving to that, that's great, but I want to have an end point clearly mapped out what we're going to do here.
Councillor, there's some long history around the regulation of stormwater in the region, and there was a program of work around a region-wide plan change on stormwater, which had stalled several years ago and has been reinvigorated in the context of individual catchment plans. So we're now advancing stormwater in the tank plan change and very actively working with Napier City and Hastings District. What that means in practice is that we'll be dealing with Wairoa when we do Northern Hawke's Bay catchment. Now, there's an open question as to whether we should be going back to having a region-wide plan change on stormwater, but of course stormwater is such a big driver of water quality that it makes sense to do it as part of the catchment plan changes as well. So we had work that was underway that stalled. We're now progressing it on a catchment basis, and I guess the frustration that leaves us with is in the case of Wairoa, they're operating under a set of very permissive rules that currently exist in the Regional Resource Management Plan. That's not to say that they shouldn't be under some kind of consent, and I need to get to the bottom of why they don't hold any consents at the present point in time.
Even for the eroding.
Well, I just think the first thing to do, if we're going to have to wait for a Northern Hawke's Bay plan that's a wait too long, I think we should look at setting out to Wairoa what our expectations and ambitions are, pronto, so we don't turn up late and have a tough conversation then. We give them early warning. And every decision they make now can be a decision making that they're going to get themselves to being compliant. Every move they make for the better is a move we didn't have.
Councillor Bevan?
Yes, so Wairoa was one of my questions that's now been covered. The second one was earlier today we had information on what's planned for Ahuriri, and the fact that there's one of the causes of degraded water is the stormwater that goes into there, and we're going to have these wetland filters that are going to be introduced to try and manage the quality of the water going into the Ahuriri. And yet it says here at number 10, overall Napier City Council are compliant in this area. That doesn't make any sense to me. How can they be compliant?
They're compliant with the resource consent.
Does that mean that there is no water quality
So
issue
there are no water quality limits, which takes us back to the tank plan change.
So it's our dumb consent that's the problem.
Well, no, it's the rules in the regional resource management plan, which are highly permissive, as I say, because the history has been that essentially you just had to manage the volume of water, not the quality of water. And so this is.
So we have to look at ourselves for this.
Well, these are the limits that we need to put in place.
Okay. As long as we know where the problem sits, we can do something about it.
Well, I think that's a really important point to be brought forward at this late stage of this particular discussion, because, you know, I read this thing, and Wayne, you don't strike me as a warm bath kind of guy. And I read this as a warm bath. That this was, you know, we are really on top of this. We just have some.
Oh, well, yeah.
We have some. We have some minor little information questions, but we rattled them, we pounded our fist a few times, and they're all taken care of, and there's nothing more to worry about here.
I appreciate your description of me. But I think it's important here, I suppose, to kind of separate the two different kind of roles within council. You know, I've been asked here, you know, to comment on, I suppose, on the monitoring, you know, regime and the relationships there. Now, essentially, what your compliance team are, we're essentially the organisation's policemen. So we're there to I suppose to follow up on the rules as they're written, and
you have to play the hand you're dealt.
If you know what I mean.
And we just heard the deal was pretty shitty.
But in terms of all the other issues that we're talking about, we've got problems with the quality of our stormwater. We've got environmental problems all over the place. You know, that's the role of the greater council, if you know what I mean. And so I can only be warm and fuzzy about the things that I deal with. I can certainly I'm certainly not warm and fuzzy when it comes down to the environment. I've ever had to have that kind of conversation. The warm bus, sorry.
Just a clarification in terms of that question, though. The way I took it, Wayne's commenting that the compliance is with the 12 resource consents that are held by Napier City. Those ones in the Ahuriri are not consented. So at all. So there's three consents. One for Landcorp and two for Napier City, which have operated in the past without consent. Those three are targeted to get consent, and those are the ones that you saw diagrams of some treatment proposed.
And to be clear, one of my parting moves from managing that part of the business was to write to those people and say you've got to sort them out. And in fact, I think Landcorp's overdue now, so they're probably due for a reminder.
Can I second the motion with a suggested amendment, and that the council be provided with a follow-up report outlining issues concerning contaminants and other issues with stormwater. So I say that you might have to tweak the resolution, but what this is really is what we've got now. This is about volume, and it's not really about runoff from zinc roofs and so on, which we're really concerned about. So we need to get that part of the picture on the table for us, and we'll have the picture as to what we want to do with stormwater.
Councillor, I think there is an existing report back to the Regional Planning Committee on precisely that, that I seem to recall.
Is that on the way?
I can't remember off the top of your... Yeah, and it is on its way and it's under preparation.
Okay, well, I'm cool with that.
Yep.
So I'll leave that. Thank you. Have a second. And no comment.
Mr. Bailey.
Just a very brief comment, Chair. I support the motion, but just to say that if we need to be on top of this issue, and I think we are starting to go that way. If we're going to be able to hold our heads up in our rural community, we've got to be really careful about making sure that we're actually taking action and express our disappointment with what's happening in the urban community as well.
Yeah, I would just add that if Councillor Curtin were still here, you probably would be facing a motion to reject the report because while it may adequately report on our handling of consents as we have them in front of us at the moment, what this last bit of questioning is revealed is that we really feel we have a pretty shabby regulatory regime around stormwater that needs serious fixing, and somehow that didn't get didn't ring through this particular report. So anyway.
Oh, we've got it now. That's
All those in favor of accepting the report?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you, sirs. All right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Can we go to the gravel one? I'm just looking at the title.
Well, I was going to say, we have staff here capable of responding to questions about any of these other reports, all of which are being provided as information. Are there any that people feel a particular need to hear from staff on?
The gravel would be.
So you would like to hear about gravel?
Mr. Chairman,
So can we?
I'm sitting here all day waiting for.
Let's do number 20.
Transport manager's been down the back there for about 3 hours, waiting patiently. I do actually believe that most of these information reports can virtually be taken as read, but
On mass.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest, but I wanted people to have a chance of dissent to treating them that way. We have one request for number 20, and we have a request, it sounds like, from Alan for 14, 15.
There's two reports from the transport manager, one after the other, and surely we can just, if there are any questions arising out of having all read them,
right,
we should pose them right now and deal with them.
All right, well, let's go. Let's 14. Let's.
Do we want to take 14?
Anne, you're doing 14 and 15, right?
We need 5.
And then we'll jump to 20.
My question on item 14 is, what initiatives is this regional council taking to change its vehicle fleet over to electric cars, electric vehicles?
Start with the chief executive.
And I'll say, if we're going to walk the talk, we're going to have to walk the walk. That ain't a fossil fuel future.
So, Councillor, the council has purchased in the last month its first plug-in electric vehicle, so we've started on the journey.
Are you driving one, Joe? Are you?
It's you. Tesla. Well, I want to say.
It's a Mitsubishi.
Congratulations, I think that's really good. We should do more of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And also just to add to that, as I understand it, the Chief Executive has approved an EV first policy for us, which is that we consider an EV before any other type of vehicle. So it has to be fit for purpose, obviously, but yeah, that's...
And as Anne's report says, that with us having done that, we have now been pressing the other territorial authorities and some other entities like the DHB and so forth to follow suit with a similar policy. So we'll see how that plays out.
So far, seeming to be fairly positive in that regard. So, yeah, we should see some action there.
Is there anything else?
Take any other questions?
Any other question I have? Sorry, some follow on the expenditure. The idea I had in my mind is that we have basically an opportunity for council loans for people to purchase electric cars. The way in which we do let people get heat smart fireplaces. Is it more expensive now? Could we do have some funding subsidy?
Look, I guess the issue is that we can tie heat smart to a property and therefore we can tie it to a rate. More difficult with a vehicle that is highly mobile and could disappear in and out of the region. So, but look, certainly an incentive around electric vehicles is in the mix, though I suspect for the electric vehicle work program over time.
I think the group that's been meeting has felt that there was lower hanging fruit to take advantage of first in terms of communications and our own expenditures and what have you, and that investment ideas in charging stations or purchases or whatever was something that would be addressed, was a useful addition in the context of the long-term plan, using, for example, that fund or what have you. But
happy to move the recommendation, Chair, on for item 14.
Any other comments on that? All those in favour?
Aye.
Opposed? Is that 15?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take this as read, just to report that we have received the final figures for our services out to June. We are about 6,000 to 7,000 passengers up on last year when you look at October to June. So what I'm saying there is that since we've put on our bus service improvements, we're seeing an improvement in patronage, although overall, taking July to September into account as well, we're still about 3k passengers down for the year. But the trend is definitely up now, so that's positive, and still a modest up, but it is an up.
Any other questions or comments on transport? And a second from Mr. Bevan. All those in favour?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Let's jump to number 20.
Sorry, we're 16 as well.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, Nathan's just left, understanding that he wasn't required, so I'll have to go and find him.
Just while that's happening, Chief, perhaps we can go to 17
Yep,
on
Myrtle Rust.
I
think it's the same gentleman, isn't it?
So that was
just there.
so that was I had a
Gravel. Can you do Myrtle Rust as well?
If we need to, it's simply a paper that...
yeah, no, I said to Campbell there was no need for him to be here to answer questions, but I did have a chat to him, and because my concern is Hawke's Bay hasn't got Myrtle Rust yet. There's been no discovery of it, but we're surrounded by Waikato, Northland, Taranaki. So it's only a matter of time, I suspect, before it happens here. And I've asked him to get brochures that help with photos and so forth to identify Myrtle Rust and get a decent distribution of them through the Hawke's Bay Fruit Growers Association, nursery companies, plant sales places and so forth, Forest and Bird, so that we've got the best possible opportunity for early sightings of it and be able to deal with it. So there's not much more to be said, I don't think. Yeah. So on that basis, I'm happy to move that the report be received, Chair.
Seconded.
Bevan and Barker?
Aye.
Aye, okay. So...
Back to 16.
16?
Nathan's not here.
Oh, he's still not here.
So I don't know
Oh.
where he's gone.
There he
Okay.
There he is. You're up.
Nathan, you're on.
Back again.
No, I've got my cough while in.
Stick it in place over there.
It's item 16.
Do you want to let them know that you only want to deal with questions?
We're just going to take as read and answer questions.
I'm hoping to do exactly that. There was just a couple of things I wanted to bring your attention to before I did that. I'm glad you pulled me back in because, look, this is our whole year's work program put in front of you, and to be not that interested in it. I'm going to take a big chunk of it as read, so you've seen what the achievements of what we've done over the last 12 months. I'm sure you've got a few questions. One question in particular I know that keeps coming up is around the farm plans and how many of those have been completed, and I just thought I'd go into a bit more detail around those themselves. The first point I'd like to make is in terms of the focus of our target, it was very much on priority catchments. So we had a target, we set ourselves a target of 100 farm plans last year and 250 farm plans this financial year coming out of priority areas. And so if you have a look at this table, it's gone one too far. Those are the 5 priority catchments that we're currently working in at the moment. And as you can see, that the plan coverage across those is around that 30% mark. Still got a long way to go, obviously, but at 30%, that's in comparison to where we haven't been actively marketing, working closely with the landholders. The average coverage is about 9%. Most of our plans we've been working with through the sheep and beef sector. Most of the other sectors do have their own processes and protocols for doing these things, which they're slowly getting up to speed with. That's just a map showing the coverage of the farm plans, and again, you can see the concentration around those priority areas. So the staff have been contacting farmers, large landowners directly in priority subcatchments as the first call of priority, and it has had a bit of an impact. The green farm plans completed at the time that the map was produced, and yellow were the ones in progress, at various stages of progress. Most of them are pretty much finished now. Yeah, so we've done, I think this year we've got 170 completed, and we've got another 40 in process. So over time, we will have come close to doing about 220, 230 this year. So we put a lot of effort into marketing. You would have seen newspaper ads, newspaper articles, adverts, billboards, one-on-one contact, direct letters to farmers, attendance at field days. The staff put a big effort in to try and drive this. It's hard work. We could have made life pretty easy for ourselves by just saying farm plans in the Tukituki, but that would not have gone to where we're focusing our work program, which is these priority areas, these hotspots, which we've been talking about all day. Yeah, we're working with a protocol for how we deal with the small farmers. That they're not a desirable market for any of the providers at this moment in time. So how we deal with the large numbers, which is particularly a problem in the tank catchment, because there's near on 1,200, whereas in the Tukituki there's around 300 to 400 small farmers, which beef and lamb, none of the industry groups are really that keen on working with. But they still require the same farm plan, nutrient budget that everybody else is doing. So we've been working closely. We've done about 30, I think 40 farm plans out of the small farms just to see what the range of issues are, the range of nutrient losses are, and to come up with a bit of a process for how we might automate a little bit how we work and engage with small farmers. Again, this is some of the data that we're now able to use. This comes from a slightly different data set, so you won't see the same coverage. We're starting, and I didn't want to put too many of these in because they start identifying properties, and I'm not overly enthused about doing some of that at this stage, but we are able to interrogate this data now and do things like compare the proportional loss from a particular farm in a particular catchment. I know we've got sort of 10, 12 different maps looking at the largest leaches of nitrogen in the highest in catchments, where you can just really pinpoint, if there's 5 people that you need to talk to, these are the areas where focus could be given. So we are putting a lot of work now into starting to interrogate a small amount of data that over time will build and become a really awesome and powerful resource. That was an operational plan. The 4 priorities, again, they are itemised in the paper. I'm really keen to get any questions you may have on that. But the one other bit of work I was very keen to talk to you about, because it's a pressing issue and it's one that we're trying to be very proactive in, is around sediment loss and how we build up a management or a more effective management approach to that. You're well aware that sedimentation in the lower end of the Tukituki is a major problem. We can do all sorts of phosphorus management upstream, but if the sediment keeps coming into there and it keeps releasing phosphorus in different conditions, it's undermining all the good work happening up catchment. We've seen a significant drop-off in Muller and poplar tails in the Southern Hawke's Bay over the last 3 years. It's gone from sort of 24 to 11,000, and we've sort of halved our clientele. We also have that SEDNet model that's identified or is able to identify specific stream catchments in terms of where the sediment's coming from. And one of the things we're really keen to test with it is its utility for planning work programs. And so we have done some work in the Makara and Hawaii catchments in particular to look at the accuracy of that information at property scale. And we've got a lot of things else going on. We've been doing lots of contacts around sediment. There's lots of work happening around reviewing the nursery. Plenty of other catchments, other regional councils doing work and building a picture around how do we manage sediment going forward. So we're just sort of capitalising on that at the moment. The SEDNet model, the Hawea and Makara catchments are in the top corner. Which one is that one? Around there, Hawea and Makara. And again, as you can see from the map, they're identified as losing a significant amount of sediment on average over the year. Some of the results that we got from the surveys and the results that we got from putting some time on the ground was there was a reduced level of contact with landowners there that they really noticed, and they in particular lamented the loss of the one-on-one, the old sort of soil conservation works, and the fact that there used to be people coming up the driveway every year. We were criticised a bit for focusing on existing clients and not trying to extend that base too much. The cost of pole planting and the time taken were issues that are always brought up. And we learnt a little bit around our systems and the fact that our system needed a little bit more flexibility to cater with the realities of not wanting to plant necessarily 150 poles, which is our minimum order, but often 50 poles is what people want to do. In terms of those two catchments, 80% of people have actually ordered poles in the last 4 years. And in terms of testing the SEDNet model, we probably have come to the conclusion that its utility at paddock scale, at farm scale, isn't accurate enough. It doesn't pick up planted protection, so soil control measures that have been, soil erosion control measures that have been put in place. It doesn't pick those up. The other thing that was struggling a little bit with was in the Makara catchment, given its history and the Makara Dam and the purpose of that dam for sediment control. It didn't pick up the modifications that have happened in that place well. So it still made a major difference in us and our ability to target at a slightly bigger scale, so sub-catchments and even finer than that, but you pretty much have to stop at a property basis. We wouldn't use it necessarily to target particular people going forward. I think, our lesson learnt is that many of the properties in those areas were identified as high risk. Only 23% really require a significant investment. Pretty much everyone needs to do some more, but not as bad as we thought coming out of the SEDNet model. There was multiple willingness to do this. 90% said they were quite happy to go on and do this, but they would appreciate some advice, they would appreciate guidance, and they would appreciate being reminded annually that there was poles to be ordered and work to be done. So we have learnt a little bit out of that, and I wanted to just finish off with some of the things we've already put in place. We are following up this investigation in the Makara and the Hawea in particular through our proposal around the Freshwater Improvement Fund, that whether we get it or not, we are focusing efforts to follow up with these farmers who have identified that they wanted some further guidance, that they wanted some reminders, that they needed some support, so we'll go in there and do that. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, we've set ourselves a target of increasing those sales by 20%. We've automated our pole ordering system, and we've got an email database now that people can order directly online. We've got someone who we have employed to ring farmers up to remind them that they're there. We've asked to extend that contact list to pretty much double what it used to be. We've done a couple of reviews, particularly around the nursery and around the RLS, around how we can cater this to get more people to sign on. And we're very interested in looking at two other things, which is to go through the private providers. One of the major shortages out there at the moment in terms of farm plan provision is soil conservation understanding. And it's a worry given we're Hawke's Bay and we've got a lot of this coming forward. So there are plenty of nutrient providers out there, not so many people who have the skill set of those old soil conservation guys. So it's something we've really got to build and keep sort of working locally. And one other bit of advice that we've given was to get a marketing campaign out there and sell the value of planting trees in a soil conservation sense from a multiple of other benefits for farm, and to do a bit of a campaign on that. So that's just two case studies in terms of the work I was hoping to, often you can put these things out there and they don't look that impressive because it's just a number on a piece of paper, but just to give you a hint of the depth of effort the team has gone into, and the team has had a 40% turnover in staff this year. We've lost 4 and gained 3 with 1 more to come on Monday. So I'd like to commend their effort because they've had to fill the gaps, as the old staff have left and the new staff have got up to speed, and it's been quite disruptive. But as you can see from the table, despite that, they've still put in a Herculean effort to do what they've done. So other than that, I'd have take any questions you may have.
Nathan, I have a question. What is the these three new people and a fourth arriving? What's typically their background and age and so forth?
Interestingly, they're all female this time around, and that's the better candidates on the day. They come from a variety of fields. One come from Dairy NZ. Another is currently on way from MPI in their climate change policy space. And we've had, the other one has come recently from the tech world, but has done a degree with Australia National University of Canberra.
So what's behind my question is the comment you made a little bit ago about the one-on-one, that's what people are missing. Are these people that you feel would carry enough mana with the average farmer to impact their thinking?
I think we've accepted a little bit that we can't do the one-on-one like we used to, and we have to get a little bit cleverer around how else we provide support. I'd love to build a team of people that was back on the paddock, because I think ultimately that's where the decisions are made, when there's a bit of trust and relationship built and people are following up. I think it's a big part of it. At this point in time, we don't see any signals to suggest we're going to have a resource of or a team like that can play that function. So we're looking at how else we can do it.
I'd like to follow up on that. How are you going to be perceived if you've just got a whole lot of chicks turning up on farm? Some farmers like to talk to blokes, and you were trying to be a bit diplomatic, which is not like you, Tom.
I
mean, that's the answer to the question.
I can tell you from experience, quite a few of them often prefer to have the females coming on too. If I compare, if you have me rock up or someone else, I can guarantee you there's some often a preference the other way.
Could I just add that this, ultimately what we're interested in here is behaviour change, and it goes back to my interest in trying to move some of our understanding and either regional or national efforts, and what does motivate farmers? Is it a young woman turning up, or do they want to see an older man? And when they turn up, how do they? Yeah, well, maybe, but they're all important questions, and understanding the important mix or the right mix is really important for us.
Throw my tuppence to it then. Farmers are business people. They take this and they'll judge the pitch on the quality of the argument and not the person delivering it. Seriously?
I agree. The two things that I would say, or the one thing I would say with the new staff that we're trying to bolster the team around is in that sort of social science practice chain. So one of the things we'd like to bring back to you at some point this year is that the RLS needs some modification. Its current form is coming to an end, and we need to look at how we now utilise that to continue to enable change in the catchment. And one of the things we've been doing in the team is building up our capacity around social science and the factors that lead to change in behaviour and changes in practice. And that's an area that we've sort of put some effort in, and the two people that we've taken on recently have come from that sort of background.
Debbie, you had more?
Yeah, I do, thank you. And this is a question directly for you, Nathan. Why didn't your team spend that $100,000?
It was tagged for the farm environment management plans, and two things: we overestimated it. The incentive was for 25% the cost of the farm plan up to a maximum of $1,000, and there were 250 farm plans in our target, and they didn't use anything like necessarily the full $1,000, and we didn't get the target fully. So a lot of the farm plans actually came through the beef and lamb LEP, which has a very low cost, and so the subsidy behind that was minimal, and we were just left with a lot more money and short of the target as well.
Just on that beef and lamb, one of the FEMP providers announced at a meeting I was at that you're no longer accepting the beef and lamb FEMP reports. Is that true or false?
No, we're still accepting them. We've just had a few issues with the quality, and that's probably one of the biggest bits of work we've got going on at the moment, is to try and ensure that the plans being delivered at the moment are as good as we can get them. And the standard is quite wide, and we've just been a little bit bullshit with beef and lamb to say, if you don't lift your game, we're not going to accept your farm plans anymore. They're still coming in because they have made some improvements, we have worked out a bit of a solution to that, but it still stands. If they can't meet the standards, we're not going to accept them. So
It would be better to for them to lift their game with you, hand in hand. They're not.
We're working closely with them to do that, but I mean, ultimately, just because they're beef and lamb, it doesn't mean we're going to not accept their farm plans if they're not good enough.
And it's not isolated to Hawke's Bay. This is a New Zealand issue with beef and lamb, and so I'm going to meet with their executive next week or the week after and have a chat about it, because it's an issue for us because they're a big part of our landscape.
Yeah. All right. And well, I'll make a comment because we seem to be doing that and we're speeding quickly. I'd just say your report, the written report, it had a sense of justification for why you hadn't achieved things, or a little bit of a blame game. It's just an observation, but your presentation up here I thought was pretty sharp. So just an observation. Thank you.
Peter?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Accepted. On to number 18. Thank you, Nathan. Just to remind you what this is the little sort of dashboard type report that's aimed at, as I said a little earlier, flagging issues that are in the pipeline somewhere that might be turn problematic at some point, or at least we should be aware of that this work is going on. Were there any questions about any of this? Seconded? Somebody second it? Peter, thank you. Any discussion? Anybody have any questions about it? All those in favor?
Aye.
Accepted. Clive River dredging.
And just simply say that it's logical to proceed down that path and start as soon as you can.
Sorry, I have a question. You're $500,000 short. What's you've got 429,000 in your reserve. Where does that come from? What's the source of that funding?
Funded through the Horizontal Plains scheme grants.
So how are we going to do the shortfall? Because you're saying it's going to cost $1 million.
So that's the conundrum we have. We're going to have 500,000 in the kitty by the end of next year. We're going to do the works associated with the consent and AE and determine what the go-forward plan is to establish a budget or an estimate. So the $1 million, and Gary's sitting in the room at the moment, is our estimate of cost of the works as it stands at the moment, and it's an LTP issue for us to consider in terms of the $500,000 shortfall. So I assume the assumption is we'll go back to Horizontal Plains rates, but we need to take that through that LTP process next year.
You can borrow against the scheme, can't you?
Yes, we've done that in the past. So there are a range of options as to how we would fund it.
The problem with that is you're going to have to be dredging this river on a very regular basis, so you'll never repay it. That's your problem.
Well, it's an assessment of the likely cost of the next quantum of dredging and the timing associated with it. So the previous two dredging exercises have been, close to funded from provisions. In this instance, and hence we're flagging it early, is the issue associated with practices that we've used in the past are probably going to be challenged this time around. So it's going to be a longer, more tenuous consents process and likely to be a much more expensive activity. So it's actually it has survived the test of time in the previous dredging operations. And sorry, it's also been modified in length and quantum also, Gary, in terms of the earlier dredging was a much larger operation, and obviously cutting the cloth to budgets to a degree that you'll see the reference to sort of a slot on the river associated with something of a smaller dimension in the more recent dredging operation. So yeah, there is a dose reality around what we can afford to do.
I also note that you're going to report back to us on all these issues.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You're going to report back to them. No point in having a triple discussion, is it?
No. No, sorry, the intent of this paper was only to answer Councillor Dick's query about what was our level of concern or understanding of getting through a consents process. So we've had the discussions internally, and we've attempted to just come back and say that's likely to be a longer process rather than a short one, so hence the comment about getting into it.
Any other comment, question? Somebody move this? Councillor, all in favor? Approved. I think we are down to 2 verbal reports. Probably Graham, these are yours, I suppose. One, certainly 20 is.
Yeah. I'll just get Gary to talk to 20 and I'm doing 21.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's the gravel.
Yeah.
So we've been out to for submissions for the gravel management plan and the code of practice for carrying out works in our rivers. We had 9 submissions, and we've been working our way through those. Most of the submissions related to relatively minor matters. So we've on the gravel management plan, by and large, the submitters were pretty happy with that. There's a few minor things to sort out, but that's more or less in a position to go now. On the code of practice, funnily enough, we had some of our more vociferous comments, and we've worked our way through those. We've still got one outstanding matter, which I think we'll be able to resolve, and the net upshot of that is we won't need to go to a hearing. Good support from the gravel extractors, which was really pleasing, I think, and that's partly because over the 6 years of the working through the issues, we've brought them alongside of us at every stage. So quite pleasing from that point of view. So there's a little bit more to do, but we're hoping to come back to you with both a code of practice and a plan that you'll be able to approve. Thank you.
Just one question, Chair.
Councillor Bell.
You described there was some submissions that were vociferous about the process. Would that have been around the timing of any gravel extraction in terms of the beach breaking, in terms of the nesting of birds and stuff like that?
Yes, it was particularly around the bird nesting, both for the gravel extraction and for the raking.
Okay,
and we've worked our way through those. The last issue actually is about a private submitter who wants to bring forest and bird into the proceedings because they missed out, and it's not actually appropriate at this stage. But that's the last outstanding.
But there is still that's still causing some concern for a particular submitter.
The way we're dealing with the bird issues is not causing them concern. We've resolved all that. It's just about involving forest and bird in the process, and having their name incorporated in a document.
Right.
Whereas we're saying, look, we're more than happy to involve them in the process. In fact, I've actually written a letter to say that we're happy to do that. So it's a sort of more of a technical issue at this stage.
Okay. No.
And sorry, I think just worth reinforcing, Gary, that we met them the other day, so they were a party to the discussions with the individual, and we actually took the issue offline from that meeting and actually spoke our way through the issues between ourselves and forest and birds. So don't misinterpret the vociferousness as that things are broken down. It was actually they didn't get engaged in the process. They explained why, which was disappointing. And then we're looking for a way to engage in that process, and we've done that in I suppose it's just a pragmatic meeting alongside where it is, and in fact the issues they had were largely dealt with or misunderstood. So again, I don't see that there's any significant issues left on the table with forest and bird.
Gans, when does the 20% of the extractors being directed down to Central Hawke's Bay actually start? Or is it anticipated to start?
So, Councillor Hewitt, we haven't decided on a particular figure, but that's an option, and we've just received legal advice on whether or not that's something we can do, and the legal advice has come back positive. Yes, we can direct, once we have our global consent in position, our authorisations, we can direct the gravel extractors to take a percentage of their take from Southern Hawke's Bay. So, and that's definitely something we're looking at. The gravel extractors have all said, look, we're not wrapped over this idea, but as long as it's the same process and we're fair to everyone, they'll go along with it. So.
And you'd also mentioned some V-cuts as a temporary sort of a band-aid, or has any of that work started?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's Wednesday or Thursday, the field trip, so hopefully there's we're going to stop at the Ascot Bridge, where there's been some physical activity, but we won't have time to go up into that proper reach, but I can talk about it there. We have, as we speak, we have significant interest identified in that area. The challenge is turning it into truckloads of stones out of the river, which is starting, but we're still going through, particularly with two of the bigger ones, they're still going through consenting processes in terms of associated with processing and washing rather than the extraction operation, but they're committed to that, so it's bear with us.
Just
I'll
to
move we
finish.
accept that report. Okay. All those in favor? Okay. I'm sorry?
It was actually just to talk about the consent process, but that's okay.
Under control. All right, HBRC disposal sites.
Unfortunately, we always end up late in the day, Garrett, and it's all glossed over, but here we go. At least I didn't do a PowerPoint this time, so I didn't waste my time doing that. So look, I'll talk to this one, and that's why I said I'll make it verbal, because I'm not going to write a whole lot of reports either. This issue was a follow-up to Edward Taylor's annual plan submission that I wasn't here for, but I understood was there was some sort of gasps of horror or references around that in terms of him playing a video here associated with what I understood to be the lower Tukituki. I wasn't here for that. I've attempted to look at the video, or I have looked at it, but through Leanne, it was a fairly challenging exercise to do that, and it was if what I saw is what you saw, it was also reasonably challenging to make some sense of it, because it was a range of cobbled together videos over probably 6 to 12 months, and that was evident from dead brown grass in summer to things that we've done literally in recent weeks. But anyway, that's what it was. It was a portrayal of what was occurring down in the lower Tuki, and I think there was three elements, and the one I'll talk about is just the disposal sites. There appeared to be a stock issue, there appeared to be a gravel one, and there appeared to be this issue about us dumping material in the river system. So the dumping of the material in the river system is a consented activity that we undertake. It was put in place, in fact, by myself in 2004. Well, sorry, it's been an activity that's gone on for years, which is disposal of our drain cleaning wastes. So it's the material we excavate from the drains within the Hiratonga Plain system, and there's been a long process over decades of that being disposed of in sections of our river systems in the boom areas. Acknowledging that people have different perceptions of that, I brought it to a head in 2004 and said, well, we'll get a consent for it. So rather than hide away, we'll confront the thing and deal with issues of perception, material quality, what we should or shouldn't be doing, and demarcations about where the stuff can come from. And so we went through a process at that time. We did material testings, we identified the drain wastes, and at the time of doing that, so just to set the scene in the late 90s, early 2000s, this material used to be excavated from the drains. It was dumped on the land alongside the drains, and it's when we had probably 80% of the areas of the Hiratonga Plains under either grazing or cropping regimes, where the material was just ploughed back into the paddock on the next management regime for that paddock. We used to dispose of about 20% of it by taking it to dump sites on the basis that there was that number of orchards. That changed dramatically through the early 2000s, so where we had 20% we could dispose of on site and 80% we had to get rid of. So that became quite a significant change and quite a significant cost imposition on the schemes. So in doing that, so hence it migrated quite quickly from a small activity to a bigger activity, and then people's perception of us doing that. So through that process, I say, we then tested material. We identified what was reasonable quality material, certainly with no issues in terms of material quality and contaminants and what have you associated with the rural sector. We identified a margin around the CBD or the urban areas of the two major cities, which go to the regional landfill. And obviously the challenge for us was dealing with those sorts of volumes, and simply taking it to the landfill would add hundreds of thousands of dollars to the scheme unnecessarily. At the same time, and the Lower Tuki was a good example where we had very poor quality silts, and we simply have a layer of silt on the Lower Tukituki. we're struggling to get trees and plants growing out there because it's a very bony, consistent size pea metal gravel, so it's poor quality, and it was a process saying if we can put some reasonable growing medium on top of that, that would help us. I was also reminded today that the area we're actually focusing on at the moment is also an area where there is a significant leakage. Now, it's not a failure leakage, but it's a leakage under the stop bank, again, because we have this very small margin of silt or a sealing layer on the river, and in fact then the water can travel under the stop bank and out on the other side, which is a phenomenon we're aware of. Putting more silt and a layer over this thing and growing vegetation on it is a good thing in terms of assisting that process. So that's what we do. The challenge we've got, and I've listed some things here which are issues for us or excuses I suppose, is that there's been a significant change in personnel in the works group over the time that I got the consents. It's no excuse, but we've changed managers, and the obvious question became, well, who knew of these consents? How well were they understood? And specific or discrete rules associated with them, which have been reasonably helpful or liberal to us. That we use these sites, they're scattered around the Hiratonga Plains to minimise transport and costs. But we also have an obligation to be sensible about tidying them up every now and then when we use them. So we may not use one for a couple of years, but when we're there, the end of a period, you'd expect to tidy it up and not leave yourself exposed for people questioning what it looks like. It's been significantly aggravated in the last 2 months with that massive wind event that we had about 6 or 8 weeks ago. We have an extraordinary volume of timber down in the rivers at the moment, and the evidence of that is the lower Tukituki site, which was the day that Edward Taylor was in videoing it, is that we are simply shifting trees that have all been blown over in the river systems that we're getting off roads, electric fences and stop banks, and we're stockpiling it for disposal. So unfortunately you've seen a volume that is a little bit extraordinary. As we speak, we have 3 excavators in the Nara River doing exactly the same thing, building stockpiles that we will burn when they're capable of being burnt. And I know that flies in the face, and I spoke to the chairman around the perception of burning and things that we should or shouldn't be doing, but they're currently the rules we have. We're out of the airshed, and it's an activity that we undertake. Coincidentally, I also met with Mike Glazebrook Friday a week ago, knowing that this was something I'm going to have to deal with, and said, well, what would your reaction be? And he said, well, he would take some of the the vegetative waste, which is the weeds out of the drains. He said, well, it seems absolutely crazy to him to bring dirt to his place that he doesn't need when you should be putting it back on the land that it's come from. I said, well, we can't do that, so we're putting it in the next best place, which actually serves a purpose for us in the rivers. The problem we have in the lower Tukituki side, acknowledging we have 6 others, so you haven't heard about those, is that it's gone from a low profile area to a high profile area for 2 reasons. We've put a cycleway there which has raised public awareness and evidence of the video you saw on the day. It's actually a closed section of river that no one should be in. That person drove in there, followed our guys around, and if you listen to the video, the comment from our driver was, oh, you better get out of here in 5 minutes because we're going to be closing for the day. So it's the same problem. Our guys went and inspected it. The concrete that's dumped in there has been dumped in there at the time through the whitebait season where we have the thing open. So we can argue about what's ours and what's someone else's, but that's a problem for us in that lower Tukituki side. So the issues that I've dealt with is we've got new staff and changes, so we've now had a session to remind them of the consenting obligations of what we're doing. The awareness and sensitivity of this site has been simply heightened because we've got some significant activity in there around those trees, and our drainage network program for this year just finished has actually been in that particular part of the region. So we've had a profile in the Tuki. We won't be doing anything there next year. The illegally dumped problem that we constantly have with damaged fences and cut gates and locks and whatever, and other people going in there and dumping rubbish, and it's a challenge for what is deemed to be our disposal site, and then other people putting their rubbish there and thinking that's perhaps acceptable. Challenge for us is the period between tidy-ups, and our consent says that we will periodically maintain and tidy the site, so we haven't broken any rules, but there's a message there about if we did it often enough, maybe we wouldn't attract the challenges. And I say the compliance section, it's a consent we have with HBRC, and they have a compliance role that we obviously have to fall into line with as well. So the message out of this is that no, this is not illegal dumping, no, it's not an uncontrolled activity. It's challenges in terms of where we do it, but the obligations are very clear to us, and the benefits to the scheme save us hundreds of thousands of dollars associated with dumping material that we think is genuine, cleanful, that doesn't need to go to a regional dump.
Councillor Bailey.
Everything ends up my fault, I think.
Just two questions, Graham. When those consents, when do they expire or due for renewal?
2025.
2025, so we've got a wee way out before
Yep.
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 And the other one would be, when they are due to expire, would you be considering different conditions on those that are perhaps less liberal?
I wouldn't. Look, renewal of our consents, we always look at the performance of what we've done, and we take our, we have a permitted activity status obviously on the bulk of what we do, but we end up with environmental codes of practice and management plans and a whole lot of rules and regulation that look after us in another form or fashion. Our desire is to minimise how much of this activity we're doing full stop, and the focus on riparian retirement and perhaps shading and trying to lessen the volumes of sediment into these systems is a focus for part of the asset management section. But there's a stark reality that we live on a floodplain that has fairly fine margins. So some of these drains are below sea level, and therefore we have a pretty intimate maintenance regime that we've got to keep looking after. So.
Two questions, Graham. Firstly, has somebody framed up a reply to Mr. Taylor as a consequence of his submission? I mean, are you going to put that in a letter that goes to him? Because I don't think he's going to be overjoyed with that sort of a response. I've got to tell you.
Perhaps I should have started. I know Mr. Taylor, so we have a history of contact over the years, and in fact it was interesting. Yes, it has been personally with me. He has an opinion about the council and asked what we do, but personally I have been to see him on in an area that he lives in, a similar situation that he's challenging us about. So there might be a little bit of, we've had similar concerns around material around waterways. I'm sorry, I think via Leanne there's been the annual plan submission, but I'm happy to send a response more formally around our recognition.
He has to have a reply. I mean, that's standard practice for us.
Yeah, sorry, but the reply through the annual plan submission I think has gone. Yeah, I'll do that, and we'll have the same discussion in another year or two.
That was my first question, Chair. The second is, since the annual plan hearings, I've had two related problems brought to my attention. The first is stock grazing on Hawke's Bay Regional Council riparian strips, and in particular the Karamu stream, and it's actually not cows, it's actually sheep. And the banks are so steep that the sheep were getting trapped and couldn't get up again. So I'm wondering whether that's the right practice, or what are we going to do about it?
So, in answering the two issues, one is the Karamu one I'm aware of because I was on the bus, I was going to say with you, the day of the Hikoi, Saturday a week ago, which is where the sheep were seen. They were mobbed up into an area which is associated with that Hawea Karamu diversion work. So from there down to the Parkway Country Park, there's a large section of the current Karamu and the grazing area that's been taken out of grazing because of the physical works, and they were mobbed up in there in an unusual number because of that particular activity. So it's not typical. What you saw there is not typical. In fact, where the sheep would normally not be there. It's a byproduct of the current major capital works on the arterial link.
Right. Okay. So
that's what it is. Unfortunately, it was a reasonably profiled area that people have seen that, and we've had that response. In fact, I think the stock has been taken away.
So you're satisfied that more generally the riparian strips are properly controlled, and we're not allowing stock to get down to the river and whatever.
And you guys glossed through the dashboard paper, but in there is significant work we're doing at the moment is this review of public use of rivers and the use of our rivers in a recreational sense. And I sat through another 2 or 3 hour meeting the other day where we are internally agonising over this issue about removal of stock from the river systems. Unfortunately, I sit toward one end with a fair degree of experience around the value and the benefits of what stock do in these river systems have done for a long period of time versus a vision or a position that we're ultimately going to get out of that. We have now, as we speak, shut down the lower half of the lower Tukituki River, and we've shut down the entire right bank of the Narrow River, which has a immediate net effect of an email I got this morning from our guys that we've, foregone $20,000 worth of income that we've got, and we have a $40,000 additional mowing obligation as we get ahead around what the
But
impacts.
can't you use hot wires to manage the stock?
Well, look, we're not going to solve it here. We'll bring it back in respect of that review work that's going on at the moment. The intent of the removal of stock of the right bank of the Nara is that we are breaking it into a variety of sections where we're going to do no work or intervention and see what, how much it deteriorates by way of weeds and vegetation growth. We're going to maintain some with mowing to one standard, and we're going to maintain one to a higher standard, and determine what the costs, the impact, and the public reaction and perception of that is. But if we apply that,
So the second issue that's been raised with me.
I want to go to the movies tonight. So I'll bring home and tell them I can't make it.
So the second issue that's been brought to my attention is the area at the bottom of Oak Ave, and people who live at the bottom of Oak Ave. There's an unsealed strip that goes right down and up onto the stop bank of the Nararora, and it's about I don't know 300-400 metres long, and it's just become a rubbish dump. People go down there and do drug deals, and
so that area has been now fenced off. Yeah. Oh, we've got plenty of them, Chocky. I could entertain you all day. We have now closed off what would be 70-odd% of Ormond Road, so it is now fenced back under the bridge. So it used to be that you could go around a kilometre downstream.
No, I'm talking where you go off the end of Oak Ave.
Oh, so just the entranceway.
Yes, correct.
And so, sorry, what's your question there?
And the people who live there have had a number of break-ins. They've had 30 sheep stolen this year. They want to put a gate across so that people can't go down there. It's in the evenings.
And rest assured, because we've done it in the past and we've done it at that particular location, they will end up with all the rubbish right at their gateway if that's what they want. So
They'd probably rather have the rubbish than the burglaries. So do we have the power to agree to do it?
Well,
I'll have to make a proposal, obviously.
We already lock off sections of our rivers on a daily basis or a nightly basis.
So the answer's yes.
Some of them are by convenience because they're adjacent to our Guppy Road depot, for example.
Yeah.
But again, rest assured, these things aren't cheap if we're suddenly paying someone to lock and unlock a gate on a daily basis.
They tell me they're prepared to fund it and put in automatic gates because they're so pissed off. Anyway, that's fine.
Get them
as
to
long as I know
talk.
we've got the power
Get them
to
to
do
talk
it,
to us.
they can propose. Yeah.
Yep, definitely.
Would someone move receiving that verbal report? Approved? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I think we have two minor items. Maybe one. Was Riparian, was this yours? That's yours? Okay. And we have Manawatu Gorge.
Manawatu Gorge, I don't want to go. We all know what's happened to Manawatu Gorge. I just wonder whether the chief executive could have a ring around the other councils where it's a time for us to have a political catch-up on this to see what we're going to do to respond to it. This poses a significant problem for this region over a long period of time, and I was wondering if the chief executive could have a ring around the other councils, see what appetite they have for having a Mayor CE's meeting, because the loss of the Manawatu Gorge will have a significant impact on this region over time. And if there's no alternative found fast or committed to find an alternative, we are going to suffer for it. And I think the time to complain or do something about it is now. The decision's been made, rather than wait 6 months, 12 months when we've all been beaten into submission with it. It'll affect our tourism, all parts of it. Our region requires transport south. Really important decision. So can I just leave it with you to do it?
Yep, no, look, happy to do it. There's just two things. So also take it up the Regional Transport Committee, and it's a shame that Alan's just left. Obviously it falls into their bailiwick somewhat, and we've also got a meeting of the governance group of the Regional Economic Development Strategy, of which access and transport's pretty key next week, so take it up at that forum as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
The meeting is adjourned.